welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beeson Family of Podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, we're going to be joined by the one and only Nick Lorensen, who does great work over at Mid-Major Madness. We're going to be taking a look at some of the mid-major teams that have really been catching his eye. He's also a part of the Queens NC basketball team, so I'm going to ask him about the reduction of students this week because a lot of these kids are away from Christmas break. How much that means for these road teams? Does that give them a little bit more of an advantage this week? How does that affect game flow in general? So we're going to be looking at a lot of mid-major basketball and some of the ins and outs in segment number 2. In the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @unit_D1. Keep in mind the letters CM. They mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, but we had a tremendous day of college basketball on Tuesday. Let's take a look back at it, try to find some trends, and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
One of the worst covered teams in all of college basketball over the last few years continues to be one of the worst covered teams in all of college basketball over the last 2 years. My DK Network grade to pick was fading Loyola Chicago, and they've got the third worst cover rate in all of college basketball since the beginning of the 2022-23 season, and we got there with Charleston Southern. Got a little bit sweaty in the second half, but for Loyola Chicago, they're unable to cover 17.5/18.5, 79-72 the final. As for Loyola Chicago, they go 4 of 15 from three-point range. They did a nice job turning the ball over just 6 times, but they only forced 6 turnovers as well. And how about 25 big points for Charleston Southern out of Alon Sumler, who looks like Charleston Southern is starting to build a little bit of something. They lose by 4 when they went up against South Carolina over the weekend, so good signs there. And you did see Winthrop get a little bit of a cover against South Carolina as well. This was a spread more around 10.5 to 11. South Carolina, they get the win, but no cover, 72-62 against Winthrop. South Carolina has been one of your better cover teams in all of college basketball. Three-point shooting does seem to be drying up a little bit with them. They go 6 of 26 from distance, but Michi Johnson had 21 points, and this has been a defense for South Carolina that really has been able to get after it. I do give a lot of credit where it is due, because for South Carolina, I believe that this team has given up north of 70 points just twice this far this season, and 72 points or fewer in just one game. So that has been very big for them. Now, I am doing this right now, right around about 7:15 p.m. Pacific time, because the Greg Peterson experience is from midnight to 3 Eastern time. I do have to do this a little bit in advance, but right now we're seeing Providence taking it to Marquette 53-41 as I record this. So Marquette, once if they rally, they're going to take one on the chin as Providence closes right around about 4.5 to 5 point underdogs at home. And I always do like these home underdog spots with Devin Carter really lighting it up as of right now. And for Marquette, they've really been turning the ball over quite a bit against a Providence team that entered in this game in the top 10 in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So it looks like we might be getting a top 10 team going down in the battle of top 25 teams that we did see from Tuesday. It was Memphis that just completely romped Virginia 77-54. Virginia has been reliant upon turnovers all season long, and they lose the turnover battle 18-12. It's a Virginia team that actually held up on the glass in this one, but Davy Jones, 26 points for Memphis. They go 9 of 23 from 3. Virginia entered in this game top 20 team in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They got exposed in this one, and Memphis right now looking like one of the better teams in all of college basketball, and I'll continue to say it. With Penny Hardaway, he was not a good coach, to say the least, 2 years ago. He has really turned the corner as a coach. He's got these guys firing all cylinders, and he himself has really been able to elevate his game. So a lot of credit where it is to he and his team. Ole Miss, they continue to be undefeated, and they continue to cover spreads as they win by 21 points against Troy by a count of 74-53. The Ole Miss defense really starting to step up as well. As for Ole Miss, they hold Troy to shooting just 8 of 22 from three-point range, but they did a good job forcing 25 turnovers along the way. 17 made field goals, 25 turnovers for Troy. For Ole Miss, Matthew Morrell, double-double in steals. 18 points, 10 steals. You don't see that very often as Ole Miss, they're able to get a nice, easy victory there. Want to see them do it against a little bit of better competition, but right now, they've really been able to ascend. James Madison just continues to cover spreads as well. They're now 7-2-1 against the spread. They went up against a Coppin State team that, man, they have broken the 65-point plateau in regulation just once this far this season, and they scored 48 points in an incredibly high possession game, 87-48, the final for Coppin State. 30 turnovers to 17 made field goals. James Madison wins this game by 39 points while going 6 of 24 from three-point range. Just absolutely insane. This James Madison team has been tremendous. They remain undefeated as well, and well, for Coppin State, they remain defeated. It's been not so good to say the least, and we're on upset alert as we've got Nichols who's going to be able to cover the spread in this one. I'm doing this with about 8 minutes remaining in the second half, but Maryland was about a 19.5 to a 20-point favorite. Currently, they are trailing Nichols by a count of 49-47, and it was 43-36 towards the front half of the second half. Maryland is actually getting it going at 9-21 from three, but for Nichols, they've started out 9-13 from three-point range. Right now, you've got a double-double already from Jamal West as he's been able to reel in 15 rebounds, 4 blocks, and 10 points with about 8 minutes remaining in the second half. So we shall see if they're able to pull off that upset, but I mean, it's been remarkable for them. It's also been a great year for Southern Utah as well. We're going to need to see if they get the cover or not, but they entered into the night 7-2 against the spread right now in a nip and tuck game against Montana State as 2.5-point underdogs. So that's one that I'm going to need to update in the AM, and we're also looking at St. Mary's versus Middle Tennessee. Game just got started as I do this podcast, so I'm going to have some cleanup for tomorrow, but 4 minutes in, and you've got St. Mary's up by kind of 17-3. So the understreak that we have been seeing with St. Mary's throughout the season, that might be withstanding, and we did see perhaps one of the saddest games in all of college basketball this season on Tuesday. Georgia Southern, they have covered just 2 spreads all season long. They don't cover this spread as well. They're 0-12 straight up. They lose to Florida Gulf Coast 53-42. For Georgia Southern, they shoot 30.5% from the floor. They get outgunned on the glass 43-30. You did have 16 points in this game out of one Aaron Banks, but man, that was very rough for Georgia Southern to say the least. It's really not going well for them. Really not going well for Notre Dame either. They get completely lambasted by the Citadel by a count of 65-45 as Micah Shrewsbury certainly does have his work cut out for him over at Notre Dame. As for the Citadel, they go just 7-21 from 3. Not like they shot it amazing, but for Notre Dame, 3 of 24 from distance. If you're on a Micah Shrewsbury team and your team goes 3 of 24 from distance, you know that you are doomed, as the Citadel actually lost the rebound battle 42-41. But for the Citadel, they did a very rock-solid job of being able to guard the arc, and Notre Dame just couldn't throw a grape in the ocean on this night. We've also been seeing Seton be a little bit all over the place, and Florida National has been one of your lesser cover teams in all of college basketball, very fair to say. And for Seton, they go on the road, they get an 80-68 win. Seton has been one of your top over teams in all of college basketball. And FIU, they fall to 5-7 against the spread on that front. So that was a little bit rough for them. Alcorn State has been one of your best over teams in all of college basketball. And as I do this, this is a game that is currently in progress. But with Alcorn State, their over streak is probably going to be coming to an end. This is a game that's in the closing seconds. The closing total on this one was right around about 148.5. Looks like this game is going to land 147. Alcorn State had played 9 out of their first 10 games to the over, but it was just flat out them not being able to do their part. 92-55. Just one final as I do this, as Aiden Wright put in their 25 big points for Drake, and Drake has been a very good defensive team as well. We saw them lock up Nevada to fewer than 60 points as well, and another team has been locked down, Mississippi Valley State. They play yet another under for Mississippi Valley State. This team has yet to break 60 in regulation this year. Out of all of their games, Mississippi Valley State has played 11 of them. Just 2 have won over the total, 79-50. Tulsa just completely throttles Middle Tennessee as Oreco Gibson was able to score 19 points for Middle Tennessee, for Mississippi Valley State, but a really bad showing there. And then USC, they go on the road, and they have been a rough cover team all season long, but they get the cover against Alabama State as about 18.5-point favorites. Alabama State, they lose this game by 20 while going 23 of 70 from the floor. And for USC, they didn't necessarily have Boogie Ellis, Isaiah Collier give you too much production, and Ellis, he only played 12 minutes in this game. Want to be checking in to see if there was any sort of an injury concern there or anything like that, but USC, they brought in there a lot of backups. They were able to take this one very handily, so a nice clean win for USC there, and this is another game that I'm doing while we are still in the balance on this one. Montana and UC Davis currently 39-38, so we shall see what we get there. And then one other result that I thought was a little bit noteworthy as well is that you had Cincinnati be unable to get the cover against Merrimack. Merrimack has been a bit all over the place with regards to their defense as far this season, but it looked very stout here, 65-49. Cincinnati gets a win, but no cover. And for Michigan, they continue to have a tough time covering. And Florida has had a tough time being able to get covers as well this season, but Florida in double overtime, 106-101. They take down Michigan. For Michigan, they go 10 of 22 from 3, but where Michigan lost this battle was down low, 54-43 for Florida. You had 22 points out of Zion pulling off the bench. For Florida, they play pretty much even up in terms of the turnovers. And for Michigan, off the bench, they only had 2 guys come in. They got 3 bench points in 50 minutes, and Jalen Llewellyn was the guy that scored the 3 bench points. That doesn't seem too sustainable, and Michigan, they ran out of gas, and that's what's going to happen when you got those sorts of rotations. So that was a little bit interesting, to say the least, in terms of the decision making there. You also saw Florida State take down North Florida 91-75, so they were able to get their offense going in that one. And then an upset from Western Carolina. They go on the road, they take down Vanderbilt 63-62, as Vanderbilt closes as a very slight favorite. But now for Vanderbilt, they have taken losses at home to Western Carolina, which honestly isn't too bad. Western Carolina has also knocked off Notre Dame on the road, but also Presbyterian, USC upstate as well. It has been not great. They got a scare from Central Arkansas to begin the season, and Vontavious Woolbright, 22 points, 12 rebounds. This guy can go for a triple-double on any given night, and for Vanderbilt, 1 of 14 from three-point range. Oy vey to them. And if you're taking a look at the landscape of college basketball right now, the overs, they still have been quite overwhelming, and they still have the lead on unders overall for the season, as we've seen about 50.9% of games go over the total. 893 overs, 863 unders. We've had some pushes along the way, and home underdogs picking up some steam, 207, 198, and 10 against the spread. Meanwhile, favorites, overall, they're hitting at about 49.9%. Favorites are 872, 875, and 27 against the spread, so very even Steven there. But if you look at the last 7 days, unders are starting to make a run. 101 unders, 90 overs, and we've had 6 pushes along the way. Meanwhile, home underdogs have gone 26, 22, and 4 against the spread in this time span, and over the last 7 days, underdogs as a whole, 99, 90, and 8 against the spread. So that's what we're seeing right now in college basketball, and that's what we all got on Tuesday. Now, let's take a look at some of the best mid-majors in all of college basketball, and how some of these, shall we say, partial crowds are going to be affecting teams, as Nick Lorensen, who does great work over at Mid-Major Madness, joins me to discuss that and so much more right here on Cuts Seats with myself, Xavier Peterson, now a part of the Decent Family Podcast.
Sports Betting Innovative Analytics has taken the guesswork and emotion out of sports betting to bring you an innovative and trustworthy resource to enhance your journey to becoming a winning player. With industry-leading money-back guarantee options backed by their sophisticated modeling, they want to introduce you to a system that's not widely seen or available to help you beat the bookmaker. Specializing in NBA, college basketball, and WNBA, your first week is always free. Get started at SBIA1.com today.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cuts Seats with myself, Greg Gibbs Peterson, now part of the Decent Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man, as Nick Lorensen. He does absolutely tremendous work over at Mid-Major Madness. On top of that, I know he's a part of the Queens NC staff, as they're looking to build themselves up as they're in that transitionary period out there in the Division I level. This is the main man that we all know and love from Mid-Major Madness, and to be able to follow Nick on Twitter/X as at N, his last name Lorensen, spelled Lorensen, and then the word sports all together. And Nick, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. It's always great to hop on here. Entering Christmas week. I know we'll talk about it a little bit later, but these next couple weeks are kind of unprecedented as we enter the end of non-conference play. We enter conference play. Students aren't on campus. creates weird crowds, weird atmospheres. Some teams get out of their elements. Sometimes it's better for road teams. It's a very interesting couple weeks. So you can only take these couple of weeks with a grain of salt, but the games matter. And we're entering almost the best time when conference play tips off, and we have really, really important basketball every night.
Yep, and every single game is important, as you know, as you don't want to be losing as a big, giant favorite or anything like that if you're some of these power teams. And we saw a lot of that last year, and you hit upon something that I think is so important this time of year. You mentioned it so well. There is a lot of kids that are away on Christmas break. They are just away in general. And how does that affect the way that you guys prepare for games? Because the crowd's probably going to be a little bit less hostile. And I remember when you last joined the show, this has changed ever since then, but you were mentioning that Queens NC, the team that you're a part of, they were undefeated at home, completely defeated on the road. And I do feel like kids being off of campus, that creates a little bit of an equalizer for these road teams.
Oh, yeah, totally. Our next game at home ended up being App State, and App State has their largest alumni base in the country in one city. It's in Charlotte. I know people were mentioning it on Twitter. I mean, that was insane. It was probably 80-20 App State fans because kids were on finals week at Queens. So it's definitely a difference maker. You go like Charleston on Monday night. They only beat Coastal Carolina by 3. Now, Charleston continuously gets nice crowds, but those students aren't on campus. They're back home. They're back home. And when you have two teams that are more even, or road teams having the hot hand going into a okay home team, it creates a toss-up. It's really completely different. And there's a good chance over this next week or two we see maybe a mid-major team that you wouldn't expect knock off a high-major team because there'll be not as many people as per usual at these crowds. So it creates a whole different atmosphere. I don't think you really prep differently, but the road team definitely has much more of an upper hand when they go on the road and play in these less hostile atmospheres because they don't have to deal with the fans.
Yep, and I do think that it is such a big element to take a look at this time of year. I still remember last year when Eastern Illinois went on the road as north of a 30-point underdog against Iowa, got it done. You saw like North Alabama knocking off Ole Miss. I don't know if we're going to see quite that level of upset this year, but man, we see some strange things happen this time of year. It's Nick Lorensen, who does absolutely amazing work over at Mid-Major Madness, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Nick, I do feel like it has been a really good year for these mid-majors, and it's been a lot of different styles. Like I had on the podcast yesterday, Sean Paulo does great work over at the Field of 68, and I know that some of the highlight teams were like a Louisiana Tech, who plays super slow. They play through Daniel Baccio. They do a nice job down low. And then you've got an Indiana State team that they just absolutely run it. They just absolutely gun it. And how big do you think it is that these power conference teams are having to see so many different styles in the non-conference portion of things? And that throws them a little bit up for a loop because I'm just noticing conference by conference, it feels like the difference in styles is about as big as it ever has been.
Well, yeah, I fully agree. And it does throw them for a loop. You know, for a long time, teams have dreaded playing Princeton because they run the Princeton style. We've seen them upset teams throughout the year, and they've had a great start this season. But you have teams like Indiana State. Their only loss so far was at Alabama. They still dropped 80 points on Alabama at Alabama. That's pretty impressive. It's much more difficult to prep for these teams. Louisiana Tech, like you mentioned, they're a little bit slow. Liberty, they run an interesting style. We saw Bellarmine. I know they went into Louisville. It doesn't mean all that much to beat Louisville, but they had that passing. They had that passing around the perimeter thing. It can throw teams off guard. Every league, when you look at it now, there's maybe half the league that everyone runs different styles. There's like one team that runs one way, one blah, 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 blah. But there's much more variance. I feel like it's much more difficult to prep for these teams because if you don't know going into the game that a team runs a certain style and you just go personal, you go straight personal and you don't watch the full game or really dig into it, it's a difference maker. It's a difference maker there.
Yep, I fully agree with you, and it has been so interesting to take a look at. And have there been a few teams in particular that you've been watching over the last few weeks, and they really have been growing on you, and they've been standing out? Because I mentioned those two that were brought to us yesterday by Sean Paulo and Louisiana Tech and Indiana State, and certainly those are two that come to the forefront to me. I know you were mentioning that you got to see App State up close and in person, and not quite the same defense that we've seen in past years, but that offense is solid. UNC Greensboro and your neck of the woods is a team that has grown on me as well. But are there a few in general that you've been taking a look at and you're like, man, this is a team that's pretty stinking dangerous?
Yeah, there's three teams. St. Joe's, it was a really, really important year for Billy Lang over there heading into the season. He was on the hot seat, and they won the Big Five. They beat Villanova. They battled Kentucky before that. This weekend they played Iona out on Long Island at UBS Arena where the Islanders play. They absolutely smoked them. It wasn't close at all. A team that maybe you thought would be middle of the pack in the A-10, now they're looking at maybe a double-bye team in the A-10. I think at this point of the season, behind Dayton, they're the second-best team in the league. You have them. You have Utah State. They lost everyone from last year. They lost Ryan Odom, their head coach. Danny Sprinkle comes down from Montana State. He brings a couple players along with him. They have a couple transfers come in, and they're 12-1. That's impressive to do regardless, but he's doing it with a completely new team and a completely new place. That program just knows how to win, and he's doing an amazing job over there. And then McNeese had a really big win against rival Louisiana. They are 9-2, I believe, and 4 of those wins are against teams that had 20-plus wins last year: Southern Miss, Louisiana, UAB, and VCU. We're seeing, I guess I could kind of see Utah State heading into the season, but if you were to tell me St. Joe's or McNeese, I know McNeese had brought in some high major transfers, and a couple people were high on them, but I didn't expect them to be playing this good, this well, and beating teams of that status this early on. So major props to all three of those coaches. Completely new. They're all first-year coaches at their new spots, and they're absolutely dominating, playing really good basketball right now. So those are three teams I'm keeping an eye on. Props to those three new coaches.
Yeah, no doubt about it. With what Will Wade has been able to do over there at McNeese, which I know sometimes we can call into question what has happened with him on the court, but it's very clear that in terms of X's and O's, in terms of being able to get a good product out there on the court, he is one of the best to be able to do it. He's really been able to transform that program. As Nick Lorensen, he does tremendous work over at Mid-Major Madness, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Nick, something else that we're seeing this week is very strangely some conference play. Typically, you don't see a lot of conference games when it comes to December 20th. Typically, you get like those one or two stray ones in like late November, early December. Then you go back into conference play until you approach New Year's, until after Christmas. What do you make out of some of these conferences, more specifically the Big East, that are going to be playing these conference games? Because we did allude to it, the overall atmosphere might not be quite the same for a lot of these schools, and it does feel a little bit weird that on Wednesday we're going to be seeing games like Creighton versus Villanova and UConn Seton Hall. Yeah,
Big East is full steam ahead here on out. It's all conference play. But, there's a lot of differences in this league. You have, say, a UConn. UConn's going to consistently have a nice crowd. You have Marquette. They're going to consistently have a nice crowd. Villanova's going to consistently have a nice crowd. But then there's also programs like, say, a Providence or a Xavier or even a Seton Hall who, when their kids aren't on campus, there's a lot more empty seats than usual. It's still pretty packed there, but there's a lot more empty seats than usual. These games matter, obviously, and it's good to get a nice little head start here. UConn goes to Seton Hall. Villanova Creighton's going to be a great one. They all matter at this point. In a league like the Big East, some schools, especially state schools like UConn, have an advantage there, and schools with a good history like a Villanova or a Creighton or Marquette where they consistently have nice crowds, they have an advantage there. But these schools that don't have kids on campus, and that's a really big part of them, like a Providence or a Seton Hall, it could be a really, really tough opening couple weeks for these teams.
Yep, it certainly can be, and I do think that it is very important to take note of. And something else I am taking note of, this is a little bit less on the mid-major side of things, but we're noticing a few undefeated teams that were very unexpected coming into the year. Like, I personally had a lot of question marks with Oklahoma coming into the year. On Wednesday, they get to take on North Carolina out there in the state of North Carolina, as they're currently ranked in the top 10 nationally, which maybe I feel like they might be overestimating them a little bit, but they go in with 0 losses. James Madison, they have been a complete and utter bulldozer. They're undefeated, and, well, if they lose the game that they were playing on Tuesday, I believe that they were just big, giant favorites. That would be very shocking, to say the least, against Coppin State. But, those two teams, along with Ole Miss, have been some of the biggest surprises in all of college basketball. And what do you make out of the undefeated teams that we do currently have? Because out of the ones that we've got, really the only one that I could have seen it from was Houston.
Yeah, totally. Starting with James Madison, they have Coppin on Tuesday, but they play Morgan State on Friday. If you remember last year, They went to Coppin State right before Christmas. Crazy game. It was 11 a.m. Juan Dixon didn't tell the refs that they moved the game up from 7 o'clock to 11 a.m., so the refs didn't show up. We had about an hour and a half delay. There were kids dancing on the floor. Then we ended up going to like quadruple overtime, and kids were just making absolutely wild shots. It was probably the wildest game I've ever been to. But I wouldn't be shocked if Morgan State gives them a fight there on Friday just because it's a road game right before Christmas. There should probably be a good elementary school outing there because it's an afternoon game. But Oklahoma's really shocking. Now, the first couple of weeks, they really didn't play all that tough of a schedule. They beat UTRGV, Texas State, Mississippi Valley State, Central Michigan. But they're starting to pick up their schedule a little bit. I know they beat USC. USC was a little bit hurt, but they dominated Providence. They beat Arkansas by 9. And I thought that Green Bay would maybe give them a little bit of a fight on Saturday, and it was never even close. You have a team like Ole Miss. When we go back to coaching, you got Beard coming over there from Texas Tech, and he's just absolutely dominated there early on. They just entered the top 25 as we're recording this on Monday, as of Monday, but they have some impressive wins. They beat Memphis. They absolutely smoked NC State. They went on the road. They beat Temple. They beat UCF on the road, and they just beat Cal. So there's a chance this Ole Miss team, it's kind of like, they already have a better resume than South Carolina did about 10 years ago when South Carolina consistently started undefeated under Frank Barden. That's kind of what the feelings I'm getting here with this Ole Miss team. They play at Southern Miss on Saturday, which should be a tough one with Andre Corbella back. It's actually in Biloxi, but it's a neutral site game against Southern Miss. But they have a good chance to go 13-0 heading into conference play, opening at Tennessee on January 6th, and that should be a really, really good one. Tennessee is one of those schools that really shouldn't be affected by students being back home because they always have good crowds. So you have those three teams in Houston. Kelvin Sampson, it's a model of consistency for that program. And they're going to go to the Big 12, and many people think maybe they'll take a step down. I don't think they'll take a step down. I think there's actually a pretty good chance that they could win the league this year. Another coach, it just comes down to coaching. An amazing coach. They beat Texas A&M on Saturday, beat Xavier at Xavier a couple of weeks ago. They won that Charleston Classic. Now, they haven't had the toughest non-conference schedule, but they've set themselves up to be undefeated heading into January 6th where they play West Virginia. And they have a pretty simple start to the conference schedule until they go to BYU on January 23rd. We could see this team at 20-0 competing for number 1 seed once again. Kelvin Sampson, I mentioned it every year, one of the most underrated coaches in the country. So it's coming down to coaching for these four teams. Mark Byington's been able to do it. He did it at Georgia Southern, who's pretty strong there, and he's built a pretty consistent program at JMU. These are four of the more underrated coaches in the country, and it just shows how much coaching really matters in college basketball.
It certainly does. With Mark Byington, I have just grown more and more a fan of his work, the way that he has set up that James Madison team, and they've always got really good depth. I love what I'm seeing there, and I always love what I'm seeing over at Mid-Major Madness because you, Nick, do an amazing job on that front. I know you're helping out the Queens NC program as well. Hopefully they can be able to build something special there, and it is always special to get you on this podcast. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and let people know how they're able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow along on Twitter/X at mid_madness and at Lorsensen Sports. But yeah, I'm excited. We got conference play coming up here soon. I feel like I'm more locked in conference play when we start watching these games. Queens has a couple big games coming up. We're recording this on Monday. We have Mercer on Tuesday. I'm in Macon. I like Macon a lot more than I thought I would. But we got Clemson on Friday. We have Duke 2 days before New Year's. So we have a really big stretch here. It would be nice to win one, even two. So it will be a fun couple weeks of basketball. I love when conference play starts. I'm getting ready to lock, and I'm so excited, Greg.
Oh, it is exciting. Conference play for most of these conferences is just around the corner. That gets started in the Big East. So the Big East, it is full steam ahead for them, and it's full steam ahead for Nick, taking a look at all this great action in college basketball. Always great to be able to get a report. Big thanks to Nick Lorensen for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family podcast. It is always great to be joined by Nick Lorensen. He does great work over at Mid-Major Madness. He's a part of that Queens NC coaching staff as well, doing a tremendous job. Taking a look at this game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins this podcast, he lends tremendous insights, and it's always great to get him aboard. Big thanks to Nick for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at unit_D1. We are going to be going in the Las Vegas rotation order, which is where we go with the games with 3 digits on the rotation first, and then the games with 6 digits, those are going to be at the bottom. And the games with 6 digits, those include teams from the independents, so any team without a conference, the America East and Northeast Conference, the MEAC, the SWAC, the Big South, the Southland, Patriot League. I believe that we have hit all of them. So how about if we get things started with 651, 652 on the betting board? It is Wofford, and if they're facing off against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State does find themselves as a favorite of anywhere between 12.5 to 13 points. Total on this game between 147.5 to 148, and I did set my total at a 144. I'm going to be looking at the under. Now for Wofford, they do find themselves outside the top 275 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but they've been doing a better job on that front, and this is not an Oklahoma State team that really plays up-tempo. They have been able to get Bryce Thompson back in the fold, who was one of their top 3-point scorers from a season ago, and should be able to help elevate an offense of Oklahoma State that has been all over the place. So I will say for Oklahoma State, the defense very much has been on par this far this season, as the only team that has broken 70 points against them is Creighton. And you know what? Creighton's going to hang north of 70 points against a lot of different teams. And additionally for Oklahoma State, you have had Javon Small come up big for this team, right around 16 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. So he did a good job of holding down the fort. Well, they were dealing with that injury to Thompson. Then you just take a look at this Wofford team, and you don't have a ton down low. Kyler Filewich has been able to do a nice job, giving you about 8 rebounds per game, but this is not the same explosive team in terms of their offense that they have been in past years. They do have someone shooting 54% from 3 in Chase Comier, but I do think that we're going to see a fall off there. It came in from Northeastern, where last year he was averaging right in the neighborhood about 3.5 points per contest, and we have started to see that fall off. He has scored a combined 14 points in the last 3 games, so he's starting to cool down. You do have a pair of guys in the backcourt in Corey Tripp along with Dylan Bailey. They've been able to combine for just below 29 points per contest. They've been able to give you a little bit from the outside with Bailey, shooting 36% from 3-point range. But for Wofford, a lot of their offensive numbers have come against, shall we say, lesser teams. To the credit of Wofford, they have been able to get to at least 74 points in now each out of their last 5 games, and they've been a little bit better on defense. Defense has given up 66 points or fewer in 3 out of their last 4 games, and you can tell that the Terriers are looking to slow things down a little bit more, but when those games came against a non-D1 team, one of those games was a game that they won by 10 points in overtime, so that's a little bit warped as well, and I do think that for Oklahoma State, being able to control things down low with Eric Daly Jr. giving you about 6.5 rebounds per game should allow this Oklahoma State team to be able to get up off the mat and should be able to get them a cover in this spot. So I did set my line at 14. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 13.5 with Oklahoma State, and did set my total at 144. It is also an early game, and typically earlier games, as it's a noon Pacific, 2 o'clock p.m. Central Time tip. Typically, guys are a little bit groggy, so looking at the under and one to lay with Oklahoma State. 653, 654 on the betting board. California plays us to UC San Diego. San Diego is a 7 to a 7.5 point underdog with your total between 141.5 and 142. I did set Cal as a 7-point favorite, so here at 7.5, I'm going to be willing to take the points with UC San Diego. It's a San Diego squad that has been able to get quite a bit out of Bryce Pope. I love the way that he's been able to flow the ball into the basket with about 17 points per contest. It's a San Diego team that also is getting in reinforcements. For the first 7 games of the season, they were without their 7-foot big man and Emmanuel Shaminga. He's been able to make a nice impact down low. Not going to be any sort of a prolific scorer when he was fully healthy last year. Delivered about 7 points, 6 rebounds per game, and this year about 6 points, 6 rebounds. That's relatively to be expected for a UC San Diego team that is outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. A lot of that was without him, and ever since he's been able to get back in the fold, fold. It does feel like UC San Diego has been able to elevate a little bit more on that front. Since his return, this team has allowed 68 points or fewer in all 4 of their games, and it is a UC San Diego team that is not super duper up-tempo. They're outside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game. This is a Cal team that is relatively mid-tempo, but you can tell that under Mark Madsen, it's a work in progress, and he inherited a mess. I mean, my goodness, the way that the Mark Fox era went in California, that was not great, but this is a team that they've got top-end talent. They really don't have a lot of depth. Fardaws Amick has been rock solid down low, giving you about 11 rebounds, 16.5 points per game at 6'11", currently shooting 37.5% from three-point range. Jalen Tyson has been a little bit of a do-it-all player because they've been without Devin Askew for much of the season, so he's had to have the ball in his hands quite a bit, though. Keontae Kennedy, who just returned in the fold, he's been able to give this team 4.3 assists, 13.5 points per game in his 3 games back for Tyson, 20 points, 7.5 boards, shoots in the mid-30s from 3. Cal a little bit careless with the ball because they are dealing with some injuries in the backcourt. Jalen Celestine has been dealing with injury as well, and it has affected this Cal defense. You take a look at this Cal team, and I know that some of these results came in overtime. As a matter of fact, 2 out of the 4, but 76-plus points allowed in 4 out of their last 5 games. Meanwhile, we've got a UC San Diego team that they pushed San Diego State to the brink. Ironically enough, Cal pushed San Diego State to overtime as well. UC San Diego just straight up lost by 1 in regulation. So both of these teams were close but no cigar on that front. And I do think that Cal, with having a little bit more size, they are going to be able to control the boards. But I do think that UC San Diego just a little bit better in terms of the overall team chemistry right now because they have been a team that has come up from the D2 level together. And I do think that UC San Diego going to hold in there against a California team that has that top end talent. They really don't have much behind it, and I do think that UC San Diego, with getting back Shaminga, much better on defense. So my total at a 141, so at the 142, diving in on the under end at north of 7, taking the points with UC San Diego. 655, 656 on the betting board. Dayton plays those to Oakland, and Oakland is an 11 to an 11.5 point underdog. Totals between 136.5 and 138.5. It's up by total 135. I'm going to be looking at the under with Oakland. They have really slowed things down this season. Oakland is typically one of those teams that they're looking to run it, they're looking to gun it, and this year they're more around about 200th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Meanwhile, you know that Dayton is not going to be a team that's going to be pushing tempo. I will say for Dayton, they've actually been very efficient with their offense, but for Dayton as well, 355th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And with Dayton, I did set them as an 11-point favorite. Once we get north of 11, like I'm seeing right now, it is a take for me on Oakland, who they didn't cover against Michigan State, but they were relatively close there. They hang in there to the tune of 11 points against Illinois. They push Ohio State to the brink. They get an outright win against Xavier. So this team has stepped up and played really good competition, with Trey Townsend being your main man. 6'6", 16 points, 7.5 boards, shooting 45.5% from 3 for an Oakland team that is still outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And I outlined how slow Dayton is out of 362 teams, 355th in terms of total possessions per game. Yet here they are, having scored 76 plus points in 4 of their last 5 games. Granted, competition in some of these games has not been terrific. Troy, SMU, Youngstown State, Grambling. The Cincinnati game is a big giant standout, but the other 4 of those teams, they're giving up points, but Dayton should be able to do a good job on the glass. Nate Santos, Dayron Holmes combined for 13.9 rebounds per game, with Holmes at right around 6'10", shooting 39% from 3. And Santos, he's shooting 54.5% from 3. Dayton as a whole shooting 40% from distance. I do think that there's going to be a little bit of fall off. Credit to this team because they did lose Malachi Smith, game number 1 of the season. They've really been able to overcome that as their main facilitators have become Javon Bennett, the transfer from Merrimack, along with Kobe Elvis. They've been able to combine for about 9 assists per contest, and Kobe Bryant is currently shooting north of 51% from 3-point range as well. Again, should see a little bit of a fall off, but I like the way that Oakland has been able to do a good job of mixing and matching. Now they're getting back Blake Lampman as well, someone who missed 6 or 7 games earlier on in the season. In that game against Michigan State, 12 points, 5 boards, 5 assists. It looks like he's back to being his normal self, and that helps out an Oakland team that doesn't necessarily have the world's greatest amount of depth as well. Oakland is going to lose that battle on the glass, but I do think that Trey Townsend holds his own. I do think that Oakland going to do a solid job against a Dayton team that they are very slow, they are very controlled, and they have been a little bit lesser on defense. They have given up 60 68 plus points in 3 out of their last 5 games. It is an Oakland team that has been able to rise up on this front, giving up fewer than 70 in 3 out of their last 5. So I do think that things could slow down. So my total 135, looking at the under, and at north of 11 right now, seeing 11.5, going to be taking the points with Oakland. 657, 658 on the betting board. It is Georgia, and they play us in Mount St. Mary's. And the Mount finds themselves as an underdog of 12 to 12.5 points. Your total between 138.5 and 140.5. Did set my total at 141. Looking at the over, the reputation around Mount St. Mary's, rightfully so, is that this is one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball. In past years, they certainly have been. Mount St. Mary's this year, though, is 117th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and they face off against a Georgia team that plays at darn near the same tempo, 113th in the country in terms of total possessions per game for Georgia. This is not necessarily a dominant team on the glass, but at the same time, they do have the 7-footer, and Russell Chaywa has been able to do a relatively solid job pulling in there about 6.5 rebounds per game, and he gets to go up against a Mount St. Mary's team that does not have a single guy that is currently giving you north of 4.7 rebounds per game. I mean, this is a team that, with the likes of Nana Akpu, Malik Jefferson in past years, they've been really good on the glass. This year they've got nothing, and for Mount St. Mary's, 15.3 turnovers per game. They lost Jalen Benjamin from a season ago, so Dakota LeFew, who was playing off the ball last season, he's been able to become a do-it-all player, and for LeFew last year at 13 points on 38% three-point shooting. This year, he's still giving you 17 points per game, but now shooting 29% from 3. He's turned the ball over right around 3 times per contest. It's just not an efficient Mount St. Mary's team. Couple that with not having a lot down low and having Xavier Lipscomb, one of their top 3-point shooters, banged up, and it's been a little bit of doomsday for them. Meanwhile, you've got a Georgia team that, while the weapons aren't necessarily supreme with this team, you do have a duo in Noah Thomason along with Jabri Abdul-Rahim, who have been able to combine for about 25 points per game. Both of these guys give between 3.5 and 4 rebounds per game, with Abdul-Rahim shooting 42.5% from 3. Georgia has done a much better job taking care of the ball, about 11 turnovers per game. Once again, you're not going to get a ton of pop from 3-point range. And then RJ Melendez, I'm just not sure what he is. 9 points, 5 boards, a steal. Feels like he does everything okay. He really doesn't do anything well, though. You've been able to get a little bit of production as well out of Blue King, the freshman. He's come in. He's been able to shoot about 33% from 3, giving you about 6.5 points per game, but is a bit of an all-or-nothing player. But I really just don't have any faith in Mount St. Mary's at this point. It's a Mount St. Mary's team that has looked a little bit better on defense recently, having given up 65 points or fewer in 3 of their last 4 games. But the teams that they allowed 65 or fewer to, Siena, St. Francis of Pennsylvania, and Loyola Maryland. Meanwhile, you got a Georgia team that has actually really stepped up with their defense, and they've done it against good competition. This team has now given up 71 points or fewer in each of their last 6 games and 7 out of their last 8, going up against the likes of Florida State, Providence, Winthrop. So I've actually been quite impressed by them. Georgia Tech is on that list as well, but I do think that with both of these teams playing quite a bit more up-tempo, I do think that Georgia is going to take it to a Mount St. Mary's team that just does not have anything down low. That should provide plenty of second chances for Georgia and a chance to be able to get a big win. I did set my line at a 17. I'm going to be willing to lay the 12 to 12.5 with Georgia, and I did set my total at 141. So looking over and going to be willing to lay it with the Bulldogs. 659, 660 on the betting board. Seton Hall plays host to UConn. UConn is a 10.5 to an 11-point road favorite. Total setting between 141.5 and 142. Fully recognize that we're going to be having fewer kids on campus than we normally would for a conference game, which is a little bit unfortunate for Seton Hall, but I'm still going to be willing to take the points. I set UConn as an 8.5-point favorite, and this UConn team is pretty amazing. The versatility that you are currently getting out of Tristan Newton is second to none. 16.5 points, 7 boards, 6 assists, a steal and a half per game. I know he's had at least 1 triple-double. I wouldn't doubt it if he gets a few more by the time the season is over as well. And this UConn team is checking the boxes both in terms of offensive and defensive efficiency. They're in the top 25 in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis. As a matter of fact, the offense is number 2 in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. But I do think that for Seton Hall, they're going to be able to do a relatively solid job of hanging in there. The biggest thing for Seton Hall is that they have to find a way to cobble up a few rebounds on the glass, because right now their main man is Jada Bediako, who comes over from Santa Clara, and he's been a solid low post player for this team. He's been able to give you 8 rebounds per game, but when you're going up against giant of the earth Donovan Clingan, who in 21 minutes per contest is giving you 6 boards, 2 blocks per game, that's a little bit of an unfair fight. Couple that with Alex Caravan and his size, he's able to give you 6+ boards, shoots 35% from 3, and as a matter of fact for UConn, out of your top 4 scorers, Clingan, Caravan, Tristan Newton, and Cam Spencer, everyone except for Spencer, it's giving you at least 6 rebounds per game, and Spencer shoots 46% from 3-point range. But for Seton Hall, I do think that there should be some positivity with their 3-point shooting coming over as well. Dre Davis, Elamir Xavier Dawes, pair of guys that a season ago shot 40+% from three, and for Davis, we're starting to see that progression for him. He's up to 38% three-point shooting after he had a massive week last week. Both of these guys giving you between 12.5 to 13 points per game. Kadari Richmond has been Mr. Versatile as well, not quite on the level of Tristan Newton, but 4.5 assists, 2 steals, 14.5 points, 6 boards per contest. He's currently shooting 12% from three. That should be going northward as well, and reinforcements are on the way down low because the team has been dealing with the injury to Elijah Hutchins-Everett, someone that comes over from Austin Peay. He should be able to give the team a little bit of help down low. Again, Seton is going to lose that battle on the glass, but I do think that for Seton, they're going to be able to hold up defensively. They've looked much better recently, giving up 70 points or fewer in each of their last 3 games. It is a Seton team that overall for the season, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they're clocking in right around 142nd, but they have also given up 22.6 points fewer per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. I do think that this is going to be a rather controlled game. Neither of these teams are snails. Neither of these teams are playing at warp speed, so I did set my total at a 142.5, mainly because I think that Seton keeps it just close enough for late game Fellingens. I did set them as an 8.5 point underdog, so looking at the points with Seton, and here at a 141.5 to 142, going to be looking at the over. 661, 662 on the betting board. It is Xavier hitting the road face-off against St. John's, and St. John's is a favorite of 3.5 points. Your total's anywhere between 155.5 and 156, and with St. John's, I did set them as a favorite of 4 points. So you're at the 3.5. It's the absolute max I'm willing to lay, but I'm going to be willing to lay it. I'm not necessarily super bullish on St. John's just yet. Want to see them progress as the season goes along. This is more or less just a fade of Xavier. With Xavier, Quincy Oliveira has done a nice job splashing the ball in the basket with about 17.5 points per game, and Desmond Claude and his 15.5 points per game has been solid as well, but even though each of your top 5 scorers for Xavier give you at least 4.4 rebounds per game, nobody really gives you north of 6 rebounds per game. As Abdul Usman, the transfer from North Texas, has been able to give you a block and a half per contest, but Xavier, just not the same three-point shooting team that they were a season ago, shooting about 33.5% from the outside. It's a Xavier team that was never particularly great on defense last year, and that's been the same thus far this season. And when you do have a fall off to about 153rd in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and additionally, when you're on the road scoring about 13.9 points fewer per 100 possessions than you do at home, that's a big issue. When you go up against the St. John's team that should be able to win that battle down low, Joel Soriano being able to chip in their 18 points and a half boards. This team has dealt with an injury to RJ Luis. Looked like he was going to be good to go. It looks like he's re-aggravated something, so that's been a bit of an issue. But Jordan Dingle, after he was one of the top scorers in all of college basketball last year, feels like he's settling into a little bit more of an off-the-ball role, but still has been effective. Double figures in 4 of the team's last 5 games. He's generated 7 steals in the last 3 contests as well, so I like what he's bringing to the table, along with Dennis Jenkins, who's just been a really good facilitator with 6 assists to about 2.8 turnovers per game. Would like to see the turnovers go downward a little bit, but that's sort of what you get when you do have a little bit of a new-look team. But for St. John's, it feels like as every passing game goes along, they do get more and more connected in terms of their offense. As the defense, it has also come along for the ride. This is a little bit of an outlier, but 55 points or fewer allowed in 3 of their last 5 games. So they certainly have been able to do a solid job on that front. It has been a Xavier team has been getting cooked on defense, giving up at least 78 points, and now 3 out of their last 5 contests have not particularly liked what I've seen there, and 75 plus points in 4 out of their last 6. So it is a good old situation if something's got to give. St. John's certainly looking to push the tempo, and Xavier is back in the top 75 in terms of total possessions per game, which is why I did set my total at a 154. I do think that 156 a little bit too lofty. St. John's still a team that is a little bit sloppy with the ball, but they've clearly improved on defense. And for Xavier, I just don't think that they're going to be able to hit enough threes to be able to help out with this total. So I did set my line at 4, willing to lay the 3.5 with St. John's, and did make my total 154. So also diving down on the under to go along with the Johnny 663, 664 on the betting board. Delaware plays us a Rider. Rider is a underdog of between 10.5 to 11 points. Your total is between 144.5 and 145.5, and with Rider, I did set them as an underdog of 12.5 points. I'm willing to lay it with Delaware. Delaware should be able to win this battle down low with the way that Christian Ray has been able to do a nice job hauling in their 8+ rebounds per game, and just a Rider team that out in a Metro Atlantic that just has not been good as far as the season, has been falling short of expectations with Rider. This has been one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. They're in the bottom 10 with that regard if you look at just raw points scored on a per possession basis. 315th in the country, and when this team hits the road, they just cannot find their offense. As on the road this far this season, they are averaging about 17 points fewer per 100 possessions than they do at home. I believe it's officially 16.8 points fewer, but man, they just have not been able to find a lot on that front. Mervyn James has been able to do a solid job. He's splashing in there 18.5 points, 7 boards per game, but you need some help from his friends. TJ Weeks, who was always about an 8 to 9 point per game scorer over at UMass, is only shooting 27% from three. He's more of a career 33% three-point shooter. Drake Ingram, who comes in from Wake Forest, has been able to give you about 6.5 rebounds per game, but he's not really a threat to give you outside shooting, which this team desperately needs. They shoot 25% from three-point range, and for Delaware, it's not like their top scorer, Jair Davis, is necessarily an amazing three-point shooter, but he just does a good job of stuff in the stat sheet with about 19.7 boards, 2.5 assists. The 33% three-point shooting is like a career high for him, but that's why you've got Calvin Riley, who's been able to shoot 40% from the outside. He gives you about 11 points per game, and then the Swiss Army knife in Jelon Trent has been massive for this team. Comes in from North Dakota. Doesn't necessarily do one thing well, but it just feels like this guy makes winning plays as he gives you about 3.5 assists, a steal and a half, 10.5 points, 4.5 boards. Once again, not a guy that's going to light you up from three-point range or anything like that, but he does a good job of just being able to tie everything together. It's not necessarily the world's deepest Delaware team, but now they've been able to get in that neighborhood about 6.5 points per game out of someone like a Tyler Hauser. They've been able to get more like 8 points, a few boards out of Niels Lane. Lane has also been able to give you about an assist and a half per game. Coming off the bench, he's able to give you a little bit of facilitation. So I do like the way that Delaware has been able to build themselves up. It's a Delaware team that is still outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but they've been doing much better recently as they've given up fewer than 70 points in each of their last 2 games. It's an offense that has gotten to at least 70 in 4 of their last 5, and for this Rider team, credit where credit is due, broken the 70-point plateau in 4 of their last 5 games, but I feel like Delaware is going to force them to shoot from three-point range, and Rider just not going to be able to do their part. I did set Delaware as a 12.5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Delaware, a team that is well outside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game, I think slows this thing down semi-total 142.5, so diving in on the under and going to be willing to lay it with Delaware. 665, 666 on the betting board. We head out to Madison Square Garden. It is Duke and Baylor doing battle. Baylor is a 1 to a 1.5 point underdog. Your total is between 154 and 156, and I did set my total at 148. I'm going to be looking at the under. This Duke team, ever since John Shire has taken over, has by no means been some sort of a super duper up-tempo team. Duke right now, 243rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and for Baylor, they're a very mid-tempo team as well. They're about 142nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. The way that Baylor has had so much success thus far this season has been the fact that going into the game against Michigan State, they were number 1 in the country in terms of both points scored on a per possession basis and three-point shooting percentage, and I did feel like they were doing for a little bit of regression, and boy did that regression hit hard over the weekend, but you still do have a Baylor team that I like these guys and what they're able to bring to the table. Jacoby Walter has been able to give you about 14 points per game. Ray J. Dennis is a point guard that is very, very masterful with about 6.5 assists per game, but you can tell that he does get a little bit too loose with it as well, about 3.8 turnovers per contest, and with having to go to Madison Square Garden, I notice this whenever we see college teams go to MSG. It just feels like the shooter's eye is a little bit off. That really affects teams that they rely upon the three-point shot, and I think that plays into the advantage of Duke, and that is a big reason why I am going to be willing to back Duke in this spot. I set them as just a 2-point favorite, so not like I think that Duke should be laying a mondo amount of points here or anything like that, but I do think that Kyle Filipowski wins that battle with about 18.5 points, 9 boards per contest down low against Yves Missy, who's been solid. He's been able to give you about 6 rebounds per game, but he's pretty much the only guy on this Baylor team that has been able to give you north of 5 rebounds per game. It's a Baylor team that has been having their turnover issues, as I was alluding to a little bit earlier, and for Duke, they do have someone in Tyrese Proctor who's done a really solid job of being able to dish out the ball. So he's been able to give you about 4.5 assists per game. Now, the problem has been the fact that he has been in and out of the fold, and he is very questionable for this game, but even if you can't get Proctor out there, you've got someone in Mr. Jeremy Roach who has done such a good job of being able to control the offense year in and year out in the absence of Proctor in the last 2 games. He combined 11 assists and 0 turnovers per game, so he is very capable of doing a tremendous job running this offense, making sure that things are crisp and clean on that front, and I do think that that's going to power Duke to a victory where I think it's going to be a little bit lower scoring. Neither of these teams play super duper up tempo, and I do think that the venue itself, Madison Square Garden, bodes very well for unders. So we did see that Florida Atlantic versus Illinois game a little bit earlier on during the season, but this is a circumstance where I did set my total more in the neighborhood of a 148. So looking at the under, and with Duke willing to lay up to 1.5 points with them. 667, 668 on the betting board. Fort Wayne is on the road playing against Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh does find themselves as a favorite of between 13 and 14 points. Your total is between 154.5 and 155. I did set my line at 11.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Fort Wayne. I feel like this Fort Wayne team is very undervalued. Fort Wayne has always been a relatively solid three-point shooting team. The issue for Fort Wayne over the last few years has been the fact that they do turn the ball over quite a bit. Thus far this season, though, they've really done a nice job of being able to hunker down on that front. They're only turning the ball over right around about 10 times per game, and this is a Pittsburgh team that has been very much propped up in terms of their analytics based on playing really bad competition. And is Fort Wayne the same as playing against like a Clemson or something like that? No, but at the same time, Fort Wayne is better than a lot of the teams that Pittsburgh has played thus far this season, as you've got four separate guys on this Fort Wayne team giving at least 12.9 points per game. As a collective, Fort Wayne, 39% three-point shooting team with 9.6 turnovers per game. And the D-True transfer, Rasheed Bello, comes over from Parkside, UW Parkside, the only Division II school out there in the great state of Wisconsin, has really been able to make an impact. 14.5 points, 4 assists. He's been able to shoot only about 32.5% from three-point range, but he gets the other great three-point shooters like a Quentin Morton Robinson, who's shooting 48.5% from the outside, like Jalen Jackson, who's shooting 42% from three-point range. Heck, Maximus Nelson, who's shooting 47.5% from three, all in the mix. Nelson gives you 8 points per game. Jackson and Morton Robinson have combined for about 28.5 points per contest. Team is very unselfish. Of your top 4 scorers, 3 of them have been able to dole out at least 2.3 assists per game, and they're getting turnovers. This team is generating 10.3 steals per game. That's more than the total amount of turnovers that they force, and that doesn't even include the dead ball turnovers that they force as well. So that's big for Pittsburgh. Blake Hinson going to need to go into takeover mode. 21.5 points per game. He shot it very well from 3 at 48% from the outside, and the question becomes, against better competition, how does freshman Carlton Carrington hold up? Because Carlton Carrington has been amazing against these lesser teams, and I will say, in the game against like Clemson, in the game against Missouri, he did have 3 turnovers in those games, but he still put up solid numbers. He had 13 points apiece. He began his career with a triple-double against North Carolina A&T and has been able to self-this 14 points, 5.5 boards, 5.5 assists, but you have some question marks with the Diaz-Graham brothers. Federico down low has been able to give you a block and a half down low, but this is a Pittsburgh team that they're leaving quite a bit of something to be desired against better teams, because if you look at the raw numbers of them ranking 26th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, you think, oh, that's pretty darn solid, but they have really been acting up a little bit more in terms of their defense. They gave up 71 points to Missouri, 86 points against Florida. Against Clemson, they give up 79 points. So in these better games against better offenses, they just have not been able to hold up their end of the bargain. Meanwhile, you've got a Fort Wayne team that's just scoring at will. They've gotten to at least 75 points in now 4 out of their last 5 games, and Fort Wayne, they have gotten to at least 70 points in all but one of their games thus far this season. The only team that's held them down is San Francisco, and I do think that the Pittsburgh overall metrics, because of the opponents that they played, they're a little bit of phony baloney. I did set my number at a 151.5 in terms of the total. I do think that there is a little bit of validity to what Pittsburgh has been doing, and I do think that it is a case where we're just not going to get enough possessions for and over. You got a Fort Wayne team that they themselves have been doing a little bit better on defense, 71 points of fear surrender in 4 of their last 6 games, so diving in on the under, but being able to get the number that I'm getting here, I'm going to be taking the points with Fort Wayne, set them as an 11.5 point underdog. 669, 670 on the betting board. NC State plays those to St. Louis. St. Louis is a 13 to a 14.5 point underdog, and your total on this game is between 151.5 and 152.5. I did set NC State as a favorite of 12 points, so this is a spot where I'm going to be willing to take 13 plus with St. Louis. St. Louis all of a sudden showing a nice heartbeat as they were able to get a tremendous win over Louisiana Tech. It's been rough for this team ever since Sincere Carey got knocked out with an injury. He suffered a really bad injury in the multi-team event that they played out in South Carolina, but they're finding a way right now with Gibson, Jimerson, along Terrence Hargrove Jr. really leading the way, combining for about 31 points per game. This team is not stout down low, as right now the only player that's really giving you north of 5 rebounds per game is Hargrove Jr., but they have been able to find a little bit of facilitation when it's been Mike Meadows in the fold, because he's missed a few games as well. Last played December 2nd. He's able to do a nice job throwing on right around about 3 assists per game, but it's been Seton Medley who has really been the guy last few games. Last 3 games without Meadows in the fold. How about a combined 15 assists and 8 turnovers? You'd like to see the turnovers come down a little bit, but for a true freshman, he's really come along for the ride. He's been able to free up some shots for some of these ancillary pieces, like you've got Larry Hughes, who's starting to heat up a little bit more. He also had 3 assists in that game against Louisiana Tech. They're starting to trust in him a little bit more. In St. Louis, right now, they're being carried by their three-point shooting about 39% from the outside, and they face off against an NC State team that they do a relatively solid job as a collective on the glass. They don't necessarily have that one guy that you sit there and you say, oh boy, we really need to contain him down low, though, as you've been able to get 6 rebounds per game out of Mohamed Diarra. On top of that, you have been able to get right around about 5.5 boards, 13.5 points per game out of DJ Burns, and for NC State, this team has been able to do a very prolific job from the outside. You've got a pair of guys in Jaden Taylor along DJ Horn combining to shoot about 42.5% from three-point range. They're giving you 28 points per game. On top of that, they're also combining for about 3 steals per game as well, as it is an NC State team that ever since Kevin Keats has taken over has been a defense that has been a little bit suspect. We're just going to call it what it is, but in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, recognize that they haven't played the world's toughest competition yet, but at home, it has been very, very good. They are giving up 86.5 points per 100 possessions at home. Now this goes up by 20.4 points per 100 possessions when they leave home, and that's a big reason why they're 100th overall in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. But this is a St. Louis team that is outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Injuries have really gotten to them. They've given up 74 plus points in 4 out of their last 5 games. So it is a situation of something's got to give. It is an NC State team that in regulation, because their Boston College game went to overtime, they have given up 72 points or fewer in 4 out of their last 5 games. But I think that this number is just a little bit too inflated. I do think that St. Louis is going to be able to hold in this game. So did set my line at a 12, being able to get 13 plus. Going to be taking a look at the points with St. Louis. And with regards to this total, I did set it at a 150. NC State has bumped down their tempo just a little bit this season, and it does feel like St. Louis starting to find their sea legs with all the injuries that they have sustained. So I'm going to be diving in on the under, and I'm going to be taking a look at the points with the Billikens. 671, 672 on the betting board. East Tennessee State is going to be playing us UMKC, and UMKC does find themselves as between 3.5 and 4.5 point underdogs. Their total is between 137.5 and 138, and with UMKC, I did set them as an underdog of 5.5 points. So laying about 3.5 to 4.5, I'm going to be willing to do so with East Tennessee State. East Tennessee State has left something to be desired from the perimeter, but this team has been able to do a really good job of having Jaden Seymour take over games down low. He's been able to give you 7 boards, 12 points, and is shooting 37.5% from three-point range. So he's really been able to well-round his game, and they go up against a Missouri-Kansas City team that, man, under Marvin Menzies, I just do not trust this team whatsoever. This team's MO is to make things grimy, make things defense-oriented, and Kansas City is right now not holding up their end of the bargain. As for UMKC, in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, this team is outside the top 300. That pairs up very badly when your team is also 250th in the country in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis, as they've tried to have Miller Kopp be Mr. Do-It-All for this team. He's always been a relatively solid three-point shooter, has never really been too much of a ball handler. I have no idea what this team is doing in terms of their rotations, because they had David and Becca Jr. do a really good job down low for the team last year, and now he has seen a slash in his minutes as well. He last year was able to give you about 7.5 or so rebounds per game, and just for no apparent reason, you've seen a drop-off in minutes, and now they have to go up against an ETSU team that is getting some good production out of Ibi Asamoah. Comes in from Delaware. He's been able to do a really good job, shooting about 43% from three-point range. He's been able to log about 16.5 points per contest. Has been dealing with a little bit of an injury. Missed their game against a non-D1 opponent. I feel like that was more precautionary than anything else. I think he should be good to go. Certainly something I'm going to be checking in on, but when it comes to UMKC against Division I competition, it has been rather rough in terms of this offense as well. 72 points or fewer scored in each of their last 3 games. All while they've had to rely upon Jamar Brown to be that main scorer, with getting about 14.5 points, 5.5 boards, but just feels like with them trying to trust an Anderson Kopp to run the offense, just has not been going well for them. 13 turnovers per game. They shoot 63% of the free throw line. They're an undisciplined team that isn't coached very well, and you've got Kamari Peterson on the flip side for ETSU with an assist-to-turnover ratio of 2, and an ETSU defense has really stepped up to the plate, giving up 72 points or fewer in each of their last 5 games. This is an ETSU team that has dealt with a lot of different styles. They're playing a little bit more slowly this year at about 250th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. UMKC right around about 250th as well, so I don't think that this is going to be some sort of an up-and-down shootout. Semi-total at 137.5, so here at the 138, diving in on the under with the TSU, 1 to lay up to 5 with them. 673, 674 on the betting board. It is Nebraska, and they play us in North Dakota. North Dakota is between an 18 to an 18.5 point underdog, and your total saying between 143 and 144, and with old North Dakota, I did set them as an underdog, more of 19 points, so here at an 18 to an 18.5. Don't want to lay much more than this, but I am going to be willing to lay the number. I've been highly impressed by what I've been seeing out of Nebraska and their overall versatility. Rink Mass has been such a good pickup for this team. Rink Mass comes in after he was at Bradley a season ago at 6'10", 6'11". This guy is able to let it fly from three-point range. He's able to give you 10 boards, 13 points per game, and has been a big reason why Nebraska all of a sudden has been able to play some defense. I mean, is this Nebraska team going to be on par with like Virginia in terms of their defense or anything like that? No, but at the same time, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, team is 37th in all of college basketball. Strangely, they're actually giving up about 4.2 points more per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. And North Dakota is actually a little bit improved on defense. They're in the top 200 with this regard. They're giving up 6.2 points fewer per 100 possessions than they did a season ago. They're actually giving up about 3 points fewer per 100 possessions on the road rather than at home. The problem for North Dakota has been you just don't have a ton down low to match up with all this versatility. Juwan Gary has been able to do a good job for this Nebraska team, giving you about 6+ rebounds per game as well. And right now, the only guy for North Dakota giving you north of 5 boards per contest, that'd be 6'8", Amar Kuljovic. You've been able to get a little bit of production in the backcourt as well with BJ Omat doing a nice job, giving you 16 points, sewing out about 2 assists per game, and right around 6'8". He's been a nice wing player for the team, but overall North Dakota is only shooting 31% from three-point range. You don't have anyone that is really giving you north of 2.5 assists per game, though. I did bump them up a little bit because they now get Tyree Iheanacho back in the fold. Spent the last 2 years at James Madison. His freshman year at North Dakota was a very productive player. 8.5 points, 5.5 boards, 4 assists per game. He had 6'4". He's able to dish out the ball. That should be able to give this team just a little bit more of their bearings, but reintroducing him after he missed the first 11 games of the season, I do think is going to be causing some chemistry issues that could cause for another fumble, another turnover or two with this North Dakota team. So that is something that I am taking note of. It is a Nebraska team that, with having Casey Shomanaga being able to shoot it well from 3, giving you double figures, I do think that they're going to be able to get theirs, and I do think that with Bryce Williams as well, being just such a reliable scorer with about 13.5 points per game, shooting 39.5% from 3, that Nebraska going to be able to get it done in this spot and be able to cover this number. Set my line at a 19, so here at 18 to 18.5, want to lay the number, and did set my total at a 143. So now that we're seeing 144s pop up, I think we've gone a little bit too far with the way that Nebraska has been improved on defense. Diving in on the under, and going to be one to lay it with Nebraska. 675, 676 on the betting board. It is Arkansas State, and they hit the road. They're facing off against Belmont. Belmont finds themselves as a favorite of between 4.5 to 5 points total on this game, and between 158 to 158.5. I did set Belmont as a favorite more in the neighborhood of 8.5 points. I'm going to be willing to lay this number with Arkansas State. They did a nice job bringing in a lot of talented players via the transfer portal, but I do have my question marks with regards to defense, and really with both of these teams, it's very fair to have your question marks with regards to both of these defenses, as Belmont leaving a lot to be desired as well. Belmont, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, 287th in all of college basketball. Arkansas State, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they're clocking in 259th. And interestingly, for Arkansas State, they're actually giving up about 4.6 points fewer per 100 possessions when they are on the road rather than when they are at home. But I just have been very impressed by what we've seen out of this Belmont team from an offensive standpoint. They did have Keyshawn Davidson get off to a little bit of a rough start to the season. Wasn't really giving you a lot in terms of anything to begin the campaign. Now he's done a nice job of being able to dish out the ball. 3+ assists in each of the last 4 games, 2 turnovers or fewer in each of the last 3, and has been able to generate some steals, So I do think that is going to be able to help out this defense moving forward, and it's just all about the fact that I don't think that there's anyone on Arkansas State that could stay in front of Cade Tyson. 18.5 points, 5 boards, 42% three-point shooter at right around 6'8". You do have someone in 6'9", DeAndre Dominguez, who's been able to do a solid job, give you 12 points per contest. A season ago, while he's playing over in the Atlantic 10 over at UMass, was able to shoot about 39% from three-point range, but he's had to play a lot more down low because Arkansas State is really lacking a lot of size. The only other player that's giving you north of 4.8 rebounds per game, that'd be Freddie Hicks, top scorer over at Tarleton State last year. Has done a nice job stuffing the stat sheet. He and Taryn Todd, both giving between 12 and 12.5 points per game. They combine for about 5 assists per game, but both of these guys also shoot below 29% from three-point range. Arkansas State has also had some turnover woes with about 13.5 turnovers per game, and despite the fact that Arkansas State has been inefficient with their defense, they actually played quite a few unders just because of those turnovers and the fact that this Arkansas State offense has been having its issues. They have scored 71 points or fewer in 3 out of their last 5 games. You had a Belmont team that it does feel like the offense is doing its part and the defense is coming along for the ride. They have given up 71 points or fewer now 4 out of the last 5 games. The game against Samford went way in the heck over the total, but that's just with the way that Samford is playing in general. But I do think that with Malik Dia being 6'9", giving you 5 boards per contest, with having some nice versatility out of Jace Willingham, about 9 points, 5 rebounds, shoots about 39% from three-point range, that Belmont should be able to overwhelm an Arkansas State team that they've been having their issues just being able to flow efficient offense. Some of the guys that returned from the season ago, like an Avery Felts, have become an afterthought with only giving the team right around about 5.5 points per game. Terrence Ford Jr. is someone that we thought was going to have some good production. He's been banged up all season long as well, and with Arkansas State not having as much depth as Belmont in a game that figures to be up-tempo, I think that that's going to be a little bit of doomsday for them. I did set my total at a 164.5. I think that both of these teams are going to be looking to grip it, rip it, and just run it down your throat. So I'm going to be looking at the over. And with Belmont, willing to lay up to 8 points with them. 677, 678 on the betting board. It is Tennessee Tech and they're facing off against Evansville. The Purple Aces do find themselves as favorites of 9.5 to 10 points. Their totals between 147 and 148. And I did set Evansville as 12-point favorites. I'm going to be willing to lay this number. With Tennessee Tech, they still do have some relatively good shooting on the roster. The problem is, this team is just really not playing a lick of defense whatsoever in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis for a Tennessee Tech team that they really don't play up tempo. So it's not like they're trying to play out of control or anything like that. Tennessee Tech currently clocking in 307th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And for Evansville, the coaching regime that took over a little bit over a year ago, doing some wonders with this team. It doesn't sound like much, but Evansville, they are giving up 6.3 points fewer per 100 possessions this year than they did a season ago. They're back up into the top 160 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And an Evansville team that over the last few years has been just putrid in terms of their offense. They're up to 103rd in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. As a matter of fact, for Evansville, in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, this team is notching right in the neighborhood about 18.5 points more per 100 possessions this year than they did a season ago. So some quantum leaps forward for this team, and I really do like what I'm seeing out of this team. Yeah, seeing Toomey down low has been able to give you about 6 rebounds per game. This is not a team that is necessarily going to be super duper imposing down low, but it's not like Tennessee Tech is doing a great job on the glass. Daniel Igbo-Wani has been able to give you about 6.5 rebounds per game, but for Evansville, the guy that's really been able to stir the drink has been the non-D1 transfer, Ben Humor-Riches. 16.5 points, 5.5 boards on 44% three-point shooting. Guys also notched 6+ rebounds each out of the last 4 games, 1 turnover and fewer in every one of those games as well. Kenny Strawbridge, he's not a guy that's going to light it up from 3, but he just makes winning plays. 10 points, 2.5 assists, 2 steals per contest, and has been an Evansville team has been able to win the turnover battle quite a bit. And this is a Tennessee Tech team that, to their credit, they only turn the ball over about 11 times per game. They're shooting about 34.5% from three-point range, but they've been dealing with an injury to Rodney Johnson. Good news for them. He did return in their last game against North Alabama. It was not too much of a score with just 6 points overall for the season, notching 13 points per contest, but he did pull in their 12 rebounds, and that's going to be very much needed in this game. You've also got Javius Harvey, who's been dealing with a little bit of ailment. He's back in the fold. He's given the team 18+ points in 4 out of the last 5 games. So Tennessee Tech does have a lot of their scores back in full, but I do like the way that Evansville has been playing at more of a moderate tempo. It is a Tennessee Tech team that they've been able to improve a little bit with their defense recently. 74 points or fewer surrendered in each of their last 4 games against Division Division I teams, and that includes a game against North Alabama where they held them to 67 points, but this is also an Evansville team that's been able to step up in terms of their defense as well, so it is a case of something's got to give, but I love the way that Evansville has been put together in general. I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a lower tempo game, especially with Tennessee Tech having some guys that are trying to play through injury, and this is a Evansville team that has been able to do a relatively solid job of holding teams to not being able to get second chances. So it is a circumstance where I did set my total at 142. I'm going to be diving in on the under. And with Evansville, willing to lay up to 11.5 points. With them, 679, 680 on the betting board. It is Grand Canyon. They play us to Sam Houston State. Sam I Am Houston State is a 14.5 point underdog. And your total sitting between 145 and 146.5. And with Sam Houston State, I did set them as an underdog of 12.5 points. I'm going to be willing to take the points. Good news for Grand Canyon is after last year, the defense was just uncharacteristically bad. That has been able to return. Grand Canyon might not be exactly what they were a few seasons ago when they were like a top 30 defense, but you know what? 58th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They're getting back to happy, but for Sam Houston State, they lose their coach in the offseason as Mr. Jason Newton is now over at New Mexico State, but they've still been able to do a relatively solid job holding up with their defense. They have been playing much more up-tempo, but they still play a similar style to how they did a season ago, and that style is just having hockey-style line changes, having a lot of guys going in and out of the fold, and just being able to know their role. You got Davon Barnes, who's been the main guy for the team coming over from Texas Southern. He's been able to give you about 14.5 points per game, and he just could not shoot to save his life over at Texas Southern. I have no idea how, I have no idea why, but like nobody can ever shoot at Texas Southern, but he's now been able to shoot about 34.5% from three-point range, and this team is doing a good job by committee of being able to hit the glass. Now, one of these guys is currently doing with a little bit of an injury in Suleiman Dembia. He should be good to go in this game for Dembia, but I mean, with he along with Keon Stroggins and also a guy that leads the team with about 6 rebounds per game, and Damon Nicholas. That gives you 3 different guys giving you at least 5.3 rebounds per game. Dumbia has been really your main rim protector, being able to give you about a block per contest. And it's the Sam Houston State team that is only shooting about 32.5% from 3. They were better on that front a season ago, but they've got a nice main facilitator in Jaden Ray, who's very willing to pass up the ball. Jaden Ray only giving you about 6.5 points per game, but 4.4 assists per contest. Needs to cut down on the turnovers, but that's not necessarily the forte of this Grand Canyon team. Grand Canyon, they themselves are actually turning the ball over 13 times per game, but this team does a good job hitting the glass with Gabe McLaughlin giving you 13 points, 8.5 boards, and then Ty and Grant Foster has really become the main man for this offense. 2 steals, 6 rebounds, 21 points per contest. It is a team that has taken a fall from their three-point shooting, and I did feel like they were quite fortunate with their three-point shooting a season ago, but with having Sidney Curry being able to control things down low, I do think that this game is going to be slowed down just a little bit. It is the same Houston State team that is still playing some solid defense. Grand Canyon, while they're still a pretty solid offense, they're not quite the same three-point shooting team as they were a season ago, and up until last year, this was a Grand Canyon team that, under the tutelage of Bryce Drew, was always more of a defense-oriented team, and I feel like they're getting back to those roots. I do think the Grand Canyon should be able to win this game, and I mean, with that environment out there in Arizona, it's one of the best home court environments in all of college basketball. I think it takes a little bit of a fall off with some of these kids being on breaks. So I did set my line more around a 12 to a 12.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Sam Houston State, and did set my total more around about a 142.5. So going in on the under as well. 681, 682 on the betting board. Liberty is going to be on the road facing off against Utah Valley. Utah Valley is a 5.5 point home underdog. Your total is between 131.5 and 130.5, and I did set Liberty as an 8-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay this number. With Liberty, this team is once again in the bottom 40 in terms of total possessions per game, and even though they lose one of the top scorers in all of college basketball season ago in Darius McGee, this team is just one of those holes greater than the sum of its parts units. They just are always able to reload, and Liberty has been one of the top offenses in all of college basketball despite their slow style. I do think that they're going to take it to a Utah Valley team that they have to makeshift and really build on the fly in terms of their backcourt, and as a result, it's resulted in Utah Valley being 311th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Now, they are scoring about 21 points more per 100 possessions when they are at home rather than on the road, but for Liberty, top 25 team in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Absolutely love what you're getting out of Kyle Rohde, about 15 points, 5 boards, and just everyone on the roster for Liberty has versatility. They're all able to pass. They're all able to shoot. You don't necessarily have that one guy, unlike last year when you had McGee really taking things things over, but you've got Colin Porter giving you 3.8 assists, so less than a turnover per game. Joseph Van Sant has been able to do a nice job down low. Liberty as a whole shooting 37.5% from three, all while turning the ball over just 9 times per contest. Meanwhile, for Utah Valley, it's been Caleb Stone-Carwell who's really had to carry the offense. Was solid at Austin Peay last year, but a number 2 option from Austin Peay a season ago has had to become your primary three-point shooter, making 37% of his threes, logging 13.5 points per game for a unit that is shooting only 28% from three, and I just can't see this going further northward. Now, where Utah Valley can hold on to this game and be able to hold in there is Trayvon Doris. He's been able to give you about 8 points, 7 boards, was a starter over at Utah State a season ago. True 7-footer that's able to do a nice job down low and but able to get about 11 points per game from Tanner Toolson, who he's a part of just that seemingly endless line of Toolsons who are all able to play out there in the state of Utah. They all give you a good production. I have no idea how, I have no idea why. Some great genes over there, but that said, with this Utah Valley team, they just have a shortage out there in the backcourt. In the front court, Doris is the only guy that really gives you north of 4.5 rebounds per game. This team is just outgunned by a Liberty team that has all sorts of versatility. It's a Liberty team that's really been able to get after it on the defensive side of things as well. Had a little bit of lapse when they went up against FAU along with Charleston, but really past that, other than that game against Furman, they have allowed fewer than 70 points in every one of their games thus far this season. And for Utah Valley, 71 points or fewer scored in each of their last 4 games. I do think that this is going to be a game that's going to be slowed down, but I do think that Liberty going to be able to execute against a Utah Valley team that still leaves a little bit of something to be desired on the defensive side of things. And Utah Valley has been a much better offense when they have been at home rather than when they've been on the road. So did set my total 136. Looking at the over, both Liberty set them as an 8-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay the number. 683, 684 on the betting board. Arizona State and Northwestern do battle from Arizona at the Footprint Center, and with Northwestern, they are between 4.5 and 5-point favorites. Totals between 136 and 137. I did set this line at a 132.5 in terms of the total. Got a Northwestern team that's playing in the bottom 40 in terms of total possessions per game, and if you've seen this Arizona State offense, you know exactly why I'm taking a look at the under, as it's been grody, to say the least. But that said, I can only set Northwestern as a 2.5-point favorite. Now, it's not just because they lost to Chicago State, but this team in general just has been having a little bit of a tough time of being able to get things going against teams that are able to just take the fight to them and are willing to be able to create a few turnovers. And you've got one of the best pickpocketers in all of college basketball in Frankie Collins. Frankie Collins for Arizona State has been their do-it-all guy, as he's been able to log 12.5 points, 5.5 boards, 3.5 assists, and 3 steals per game. Arizona State, 8.7 steals per contest. Once again, an Arizona State offense that is grody. They are well outside the top 200 in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis, but they do a good job of rebounding by committee in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. This Arizona State team has been able to hold their own. They're a top 70 team with that regard, and this is being played out there in the great state of Arizona. That does give them a little bit of an edge. They have a deal with a few injuries, guys like Zane Meeks and company not being out there in the fold, and for Arizona State, they only shoot about 30% from 3-point range, but for Northwestern, they're not going to be able to dominate this game. They've only got one guy down low that gives you north of 3.6 rebounds per game, Brooks Breinheiser, who's been solid, 7.5 rebounds, 2 steals, about 2.7 assists per game, and Northwestern, they themselves do a nice job of being able to pickpocket as well. With Northwestern, they only turn the ball over about 8.5 times per game, but we have noticed a little bit more inefficiency in those most recent games. That game against Chicago State was very telling. For Northwestern, they do shoot about 35% from 3-point range, and Boo Buie, one of the most veteran guards in all of college basketball, 18 points, 5 assists per game, and Ryan Langford has been able to help out with about 13.5 points per contest, but there's really no depth with this Northwestern team. They've got about a 5.5-man rotation, and at the very least for Arizona State, it feels like things are getting better as Jose Perez has gotten more and more acclimated to this roster, as he joined the team about 3 weeks before the start of the season after he was pretty much just kicked out of West Virginia due to academic reasons. You've been able to have Brian Settlebungiu be able to give you about 4.5 rebounds per game, and the rebounding by committee for Arizona State has been very good. Each of your top 6 scorers do give you at least 3.6 rebounds per game. I do think that that's an aspect that Arizona State is going to be able to take advantage of. Now, the reason why I can't take Arizona State outright here is they're shooting 62.2% at the free throw line. That's really, really bad. I mean, other than Adam Miller, who's now back in the fold, and that's a big reason to take a look at some upside side with this Arizona State offense as well. He had 20 points in the first game out there, but sans Adam Miller, who's played one game, you don't have really anyone that's averaging north of 4.5 points per game that's shooting above 70% at the free throw line, so that's a little bit of an issue, but I think that this is a drag them out, grimy game in which neither team is able to get a lot of offense going, so I did set my total more around a 132.5. I'm looking at the under end with Arizona State being able to catch these sorts of points in their home state. Going to be willing to take it, set them as a 2.5 point underdog, so taking Arizona State and the under 685, 686 on the betting board. Creighton is going to be playing against Villanova, and Villanova is an underdog between 7 to 7.5 points. Your total on this game are between 139.5 and 140.5. Want to lay up to 8 with Creighton. I did set them as an 8.5 point favorite with Villanova. This team has been very much all over the place as far this season as they've been dealing with a few injuries as well. I know that Justin Moore has been dealing with a bit of an ailment. Villanova actually looked really good without him in that game against UCLA about a week or so ago as well. And you do have to wonder if there's a little bit of rust that is occurring for Villanova. This is going to be their first game in a little bit north of 10 days. Some might argue that this is a good thing. Some might argue that this is a little bit of a bad thing. And for Villanova, you do have a pair of guys that have good versatility in Eric Dixon, Tyler Burton, who have been able to combine for 14.5 rebounds, 23.5 points per game, and both shoot about 34 to 36% from three-point range. Villanova, once again, doing the little things well. They turn the ball over 10 times per contest. They shoot 82% at the free throw line, but they go up against a Creighton team that I recognize that they did have that clunker against UNLV about a week or so ago, but with Creighton, they just find a way to be efficient on offense. This is not an up-tempo Creighton team. They're outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, much like this Villanova bunch, but Creighton, in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, number 3 in all of college basketball, and they're just a different breed when they're at home rather than when they are on the road. And to illustrate this, they are scoring 25.6 points more per 100 possessions in home games rather than when they're on a road/neutral court environment. You've got a Creighton team that has a big three in Trey Alexander, along with Baylor Shireman, Ryan Kalkbrenner. All three of these guys give you at least 6.2 rebounds per game. They're averaging between 15.5 and 18.5 points per game. Shireman and Alexander, between the two of them, 9.2 assists per game, while Kalkbrenner gives you 2.5 blocks per game. But you've got a lot of talent outside of that. Isaac Trout, who comes in from Virginia, has been able to give you about 5.5 points per contest. Frederick King down low is able to give you a pair of boards, right around 4.5 boards per contest. Frank Farabello, he's able to give you some nice facilitation as well. Steve Ashworth, he's just been really efficient with the ball, doesn't really turn it over a lot. Creighton has only turned the ball over about 10 times per contest as well, and it is going to be interesting to see what you get out of the Creighton defense, because up until that game against UNLV, team was looking very rock solid. They've now given up a combined 161 points in their last 2 games, but they go up against a Villanova team that they're slow in control, but it's not like they're playing amazing defense right now. They're 63rd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They had a very nice game against UCLA. I attribute that a little bit more to the fact that UCLA just has no offense to speak of whatsoever. So very interesting spot here. I did set my total at 144.5. I do think that though it's going to be a low possession, slow game, both of these teams execute very well, and I do think the Creighton going to be able to execute at their best at home. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 8 with Creighton. And with this total, I'm going to be looking at the over as well. 687, 688 on the betting board. It is Oklahoma, and they're going to be playing against North Carolina. This is from the Spectrum Center, so this is in the great state of North Carolina, and North Carolina is between a 2 to 2.5 point favorite. Your total is between 154 and 154.5. I did set my total at 147. I'm going to be looking at the under. North Carolina is never going to be mistaken for the Mona Lisa Vito of defense or anything like that, but the North Carolina defense has honestly been a little bit better thus far this season, which isn't saying a whole heck of a lot, but in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, team is clocking in right around 128th, and I foresee some regression coming through for an Oklahoma team that has been very efficient to begin the season. I feel like Porter Mosier has done an incredible job with this unit, but at the same time, I just take a look at some of these shooting numbers, and they just don't appear to be sustainable. As right now, you're getting about 54% three-point shooting. John Hughley has been able to give you about 10.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. The raw numbers of 10.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game, I think is sustainable. Him shooting 54% from 3, not so much. You've got Otega Otwe, hopefully I said that correctly, currently shooting 66% from three-point range. I mean, my goodness, actually 75% from three-point range. So I do take a look at that. I see a little bit of a fall off. And for Oklahoma, while they're scoring a bunch of points, they are turning the ball over about 13 times per contest as well. Now, the good news for them, they go up against a North Carolina team that never has and never will be a team that generates a whole bunch of turnovers. But at the same time, for North Carolina, I would not be surprised if things slow down a little bit more for them in this game as they look to take advantage of the biggest weakness of Oklahoma. Oklahoma, not great on the glass. You've got Hughley giving you 5+ rebounds per game. Sam Godwin is able to give you about 6 boards as well. But but North Carolina's best attribute in this game is having Armando Bacot and the fact that he gives you 15 points, 11.5 boards, nearly 2 blocks per contest. North Carolina should be really living inside as they're shooting as collective about 35.5% from three-point range. RJ Davis has been able to do a tremendous job. He's been able to give you about 21 points per contest, has been able to shoot it quite well from three-point range, but at the same time as well, they're going up against an Oklahoma team that they have been able to do a really nice job of being able to lock down from three-point range. Opponents are shooting 25.6% from three-point range, and that is not sustainable. That is not sustainable at all. With that said, you can look at that number and say that it's not sustainable, and at the same time recognize that they're doing a really good job with their perimeter defense as well, which should neutralize a little bit more of what we're seeing out of someone like Seth Trimble has been able to give you about 5.5 points per game coming in off the bench. I do think that Harrison Ingram, his overall versatility, steal and a half, 2.5 assists, 14.5 points per game, while shooting 43% from three, going to be big as well. And this is a North Carolina team that, while they don't do a ton of pickpocketing themselves, they do a nice job taking care of the ball. With about 10.5 turnovers per game, it's an Oklahoma team that has given up 70 points or fewer in 4 of their last 5 games, and they played against good competition, USC, Providence, Arkansas, so they have really battle-tested themselves. But I do think that with this game being played on a neutral court, that is going to cause for a little bit of rough shooting, to say the least. I do think that North Carolina going to have a tough time from the outside, but I do think that North Carolina wins this game from within, because I think that Bacot is going to be able to dominate the forwards of Oklahoma, which is why I did set my line at 3. I'm going to be willing to lay it with North Carolina. And when it comes to total, did set mine at a 147, so I'm diving in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay the number with North Carolina. 689, 690 on the betting board. It is New Mexico, and they play us UC Irvine. Zot for the Anteaters, who are between 8 and 8.5 point underdogs, and your totals between 152 and 153.5. Going to be willing to back UC Irvine. I did set them as a 6-point underdog, so could it be one to take this New Mexico team, to the surprise of myself and I'm sure many others? They've actually been one of the best defensive teams in all of college basketball. When you think New Mexico, you think of the high-flying offense, you think of all these guys, they're able to just light it up from three-point range, what have you, but New Mexico is right now 15th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and that's actually a whole heck of a lot more efficient than this UC Irvine defense, which is more around 86th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. But with this UC Irvine defense, they're actually allowing 2.7 points fewer per 100 possessions when they are on the road rather than when they are at home. And on the road, UC Irvine, a top 30 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They've been dealing with the injury to their 7-footer in Benton Lutken, who was able to shoot some threes, so that's been a little bit of an issue for this team, but you've been able to get some really good contributions in the backcourt, because they've got one of the most efficient point guards in all of college basketball, and that would be Pierre Cockrell, who's been able to give you about 5 assists per contest. Not really looking to shoot. He only gives you about 6 or so points per contest, but he's able to find a lot of these guys in space, like a Justin Hohen, who's been able to give you about 13.5 points per game, shooting 38.5% from three-point range. Yeah, Devin Tillsby a little bit banged up, but he returned in the team's last game against South Dakota, where they dropped 121, and he had 16.7 rebounds and 0 turnovers, so looks like he's all good to go there. You've been able to get about 9 points per contest out of Andre Henry, as well as been able to step up after he last year was a little bit of an afterthought in the backcourt. And this is just a UC Irvine team that they work really well together in tandem. You don't have that one guy that's really able to elevate a team. You don't have that one guy that's going to go out there and completely dominate a game, but you just have 7 to 8 guys that play really well in concert, and you've got a New Mexico team that they've been able to overcome all sorts of injuries. They've been without Jamal Mashburn Jr. for darn near a month, and it hasn't affected them. They've gotten Jaden House back to the fold with Jalen House. He's been able to do a really nice job, giving you about 3.5 assists, 3.3 steals per game. His overall offensive numbers are down, but that's because Donovan Dent has done such a good job running the offense with about 6.5 assists per game, despite the fact that New Mexico is a high-flying team that is playing quite up-tempo. They only turn the ball over about 11 times per contest. They have found a really good three-point shooter in True Washington, who has been true from three, shooting 46% from distance, 11 points per game, and then what has allowed the team to be so good on the defensive side of things, Nelly Jr. Joseph and JT Toppin, both giving 7.4 rebounds per game. They've really bought in on the defensive side of things with a combined 2.5 blocks per game. Jamerrill Baker has been a nice ancillary scorer for this team as well. New Mexico has a lot of depth. UC Irvine has a lot of depth. Both of these teams are able to put up massive numbers on offense, and both of these teams are really good on the defensive side of things as well. So I think that we're in for a fun slobber knocker. I did set my line at 6. I'm going to be willing to take the points with UC Irvine, and I did set my total at 154. UC Irvine, more lauded for their defense. I do think that New Mexico's defensive numbers have been propped up a little bit by playing lesser competition, but I do think that New Mexico going to be able to put up a big number themselves. So I'm going to be taking a look at the over, and I'm going to be willing to take the points with Irvine. 691, 692 on the betting board. It is Seattle. They play us to Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech is an underdog of a point, and your total is between 134.5 and 135, and I did tell Louisiana Tech is 2.5-point underdogs. I'm going to be willing to lay the small number. Seattle, so close to pulling off that upset against Washington. You do have to wonder if that's a little bit of a gut punch and if they come out a little bit lackadaisical. I think not, though, because Seattle, they lost every single game they've ever played against Washington, but I mean, for this Seattle team, they have been able to do a really tough job on defense. They did give up 100 points in that game against Washington, but obviously that's because the game goes to double overtime. Things get completely harebrained there, so that explains why, and that does warp their defensive numbers a little bit. So if you take a look at just on a per-possession basis with regards to Seattle, they've been able to do a solid job, 60th in the country with this regard, and they go up against a Louisiana Tech team that their bread and butter, certainly on the defensive side of things as well. For Louisiana Tech, they're 36th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, and Louisiana Tech is going to have the best true post player in this game at Daniel Pacho, who's able to give you about 10.5 rebounds per game. The question with Louisiana Tech, are you going to be able to get enough offense? And right now, they have been able to elevate a little bit, shooting 37% from three. Isaiah Crawford has been incredible. I mean, this guy's doing it all. 14.5 points, 5.5 boards, 3 assists, 2 steals, 1.2 blocks per game, while shooting 45% from the outside. Talik Chavez shoots 38% from three-point range. Drayvon Magnum, he's a 6'8" combo player that's able to let it fly from three-point range, giving you about 4.5 rebounds per game. But outside of Daniel Pacho, you've got 2 other guys on the roster that give you north of 3.1 rebounds per game. Meanwhile, with Seattle, you've got a little bit of a better collective on this team, as you've got a pair of guys in Kobe Williamson, Brandon Chatfield, who both have been able to give you about 5.5 boards per contest. They will chip in there a little bit north of a block per game as well. And big for this team, John Christofilis. He is back in the fold as well. He has been all sorts of banged up the last few seasons. Came back, was able to put in their 6 points in that game against Washington, so that gives this team a little bit of added depth. Actually began his career over at Creighton as like a top 250 recruit, so that's going to be able to elevate this team moving forward. And then you got your top scorer in Cameron Tyson, who's able to give you 18 points on 40% three-point shooting. That guy has just been a walking bucket last few seasons in all of college basketball for Seattle. Biggest thing that they need to work on, the 13.5 turnovers per game, but with Louisiana Tech having to travel, and with Louisiana Tech getting a little bit exposed over the weekend against St. Louis, this has not been the same defensive effort when they have been on the road rather than when they have been at home. That does cause for a few question marks, and I do think that Seattle going to be able to win a game that involves 2 of the better mid-major defenses in all of college basketball. Sets Seattle as a 2.5-point favorite, going to be willing to lay the number, and I did set my total at 134.5, so now that we're getting 135s out there, looking at the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay with Seattle. 693, 694 on the betting board. Santa Clara, it's a road face-off against San Jose State. San Jose State is a 2 to 2.5-point underdog, and your total is between 147 and 147.5. With San Jose State, did set them as a 2-point underdog. Now that we're seeing 2.5 surface, I am going to be willing to take the points. Santa Clara's already knocked off 3 Pac-12 teams, so they are no strangers being able to pull off big-time wins, and they're going up against a San Jose State team that really has been bit by the injury bug, as prior to the start of the season, they had their main guy down low and Robert Viola go down with a little bit of an injury. I know that they've been dealing with Trey Anderson being in and out of the fold. He has missed the last few games for the team, but you still have quite a few guys I do like in the backcourt, as you've been able to get about 5.5 assists, 13.5 points per game out of Alvaro Cardenas. Cardenas has been able to shoot also about 35% from three-point range, and he really helps out their main scorer, Myron Amy, who's been able to give you 3 assists. These 2 guys, in Cardenas and Amy Jr., about 2.5 steals per contest as well. And it's a San Jose State team that, while they leave something to be desired on offense, the team has been one of the better mid-major defenses in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. They, up until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, were in the top 50 with this regard. Now, things have gotten a little bit harebrained recently. They've given up 75-plus points in every game that they have played here in December, and this is a Santa Clara team that is going to be bringing at them a lot of size. With Santa Clara, they too have fallen on some tough times. They have lost 3 out of their last 4 games. Losing to Cal, Utah State, and New Mexico. Both of these teams have played some really tough competition going into this game, so it's a desperation mode for both of these teams to be able to get back on track and get a win. But Adama Ball, Carlos Marshall, they've been able to combine for 29.5 points per game. Both of these guys, coupled with their number 3 option, and Tyree Bryan, who's been able to give you 9.5 points per game, they all shoot at least 41% from 3. Santa Clara has a little bit of a turnover woe, 14 turnovers per game as a mid-tempo team, but they shoot about 36% from three-point range. They do a good job rebounding by committee as well. You've got 4 separate guys that give you at least 4.2 rebounds per game. Christoph Tilley is a true 7-footer that's able to defend down low. The team doesn't necessarily erase a lot of shots via blocks, and this team is not going to be one that necessarily turns you over a lot in terms of pickpocketing, which is a big reason why they are just 144th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. But It is a San Jose State team that they are a little bit more low tempo. Now, I will say for San Jose State, 77 plus points in 4 of their last 5 games. 2 of those games go to overtime, though, and then they play against New Orleans, who's just an all over the place, harebrained team. And I do feel like some of these numbers for both of these teams have been warped based on the competition that they played. And in the case of San Jose State, the overtimes that they have played, that has thrown their defensive numbers for a little bit of a loop. And I do think that both of these teams do get back to a little bit more basics. I do think that things are going to be a little bit more buttoned up. So I did set my total at 144, diving in on the under. I do think that the overall size of Santa Clara wins out, but the overall versatility of San Jose State going to be able to keep them close, even with them deal with that injury to Trey Anderson. So I did set my total at 144, diving in on the under, and at north of 2, going to be willing to take the points with San Jose State, 695, 696 on the betting board. San Francisco is playing us in Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona between a 14.5 to a 15-point underdog. Your total on this game is 135, and with Northern Arizona, did set them as an underdog of 18 points. I'm going to be willing to lay it with San Francisco. San Francisco does need to work on the turnovers, north of 13 per contest. Not really cutting it, but with this Don's team, they've done a really good job of being able to have great rebounding with Jonathan Mogbo taking things over with 10 rebounds per game. And for Northern Arizona, Carson Towd is Bigfoot. We've heard a lot about him. Nobody has seen him this far this season after he was the team's top rebounder and a really good big man in terms of his passing as well. At 6'8", last season, he was giving out right around about 3 assists per contest. Nowhere to be seen thus far this season, and that has led to Northern Arizona just not being an efficient team in general. They've had a tough time being able to put the ball in the basket. In terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, this is never a particularly good Northern Arizona team, and this is not helping as they're about 191st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. You have been able to get one primary scorer to step up for this team in Trent McLaughlin, who's been able to log about 16 points per game, shooting about 38.5% from 3-point range, and you're getting about 45.5% from 3-point shooting out of Diego Capusano, who's been able to give you about 7 points per game. Feels like he's really picked up confidence recently with 9+ points in 3 of the team's last 4 games and 5+ rebounds in all of them as well. Capusano could be a really big spark plug for Northern Arizona down the stretch, but you were hoping to see a little bit more out of Oakland Ford after he had a Big Sky tournament. He's been able to up his game a little bit more recently, but got off to a little bit of a lackadaisical start to begin the season with Northern Arizona. You've only got one guy giving you north of 5 rebounds per game, and Carson Basham, who comes over from Pepperdine, so San Francisco should be able to win that battle in San Francisco, though they do turn the ball over a little bit more than what you'd like. You've got a guy in Mongolian Mike who's been able to do a good job at 6'8", be a bit of a point forward, as he, along with Mogbo and Marcus Williams, your top 3 scorers, all give you north of 3 assists per game. It's a San Francisco team that's generating nearly 9 steals per game. They do a nice job of being able to take the ball away, and this is a Northern Arizona bunch that they're picking up some confidence. They've won 4 straight games, but hasn't necessarily been due to their defense, as for Northern Arizona, they've now given up at least 70 points in 5 out of their last 6 games. They've given up at least 69 points in 8 out of their last 9 games, and this is a San Francisco team that does a really good job of just slowing games down and sticking in the mud. They have given up 60 points or fewer in 3 out of their last 4 games. They lose to Utah State in a 54-53 slog, and I do think that San Francisco just going to suck the life out of this game in general. I did set them as an 18-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number, and with the inefficiency of Northern Arizona, and Northern Arizona finding a few more good scores to be able to help them out, did set my total 138. So looking at the over and the San Francisco Dons laying the number 697, 698 on the betting board. Cal State Fullerton is going to be playing us to Pacific. Pacific is an underdog of 12.5 to 13 points. Your total is between 135.5 and 136. And with Pacific, I did set them as an underdog of 14 points. I'm going to be willing to lay it. Pacific has covered 1 game thus far this season. That was their straight-up win against California towards the beginning part of the season. And ever since then, this team has been all sorts of disappointing. As for Pacific, this team is just getting barbecued on defense. They did knock off a non-Division I opponent in their most recent game. But if you're looking at D1 opponents and D1 opponents only, this team has now given up at least 78 points in each of their last 5 games, and they have held one Division I opponent since opening night against Sam Houston to fewer than 70 points. It's been not great to say the least, and well, it's just really bad for Pacific. They have no size down low. You've got one player that gives you north of 4 rebounds per game. That'd be Cam Denson. He's standing 6'7", be able to give you about 8 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. That, coupled with the fact that Pacific is turning the ball over 14 times per contest, and they shoot 30.5% from 3. So they can't shoot from 3, they can't hold on to the ball, and they can't rebound. That's not great. And on top of that, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, Pacific is getting cooked. 274th in the country with this regard. Now, you got a Cal State Fullerton team that they really are missing some of those guys like Flotrell, Wrightsell, and company from a season ago. And for Fullerton, they're about 245th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Vincent Lee only giving you about 3.5, 4 rebounds per game. That's not great, but you do have Grayson Carper, who's been able to give you about 5 boards, 6.5 points per game, and you've got by far the best scorer in this game in Max Jones, 17 points, 2 steals, shooting in the mid-30s from three-point range for Fullerton. It's not been great for them from the outside as well. They're about 30.5% from three-point range, but the good news is now they are getting some reinforcements back in the fold as Torrey San Antonio, a really good defender for this team. He was missing throughout the first 9 or so games of the season. He's back in the fold after a season ago. He gave the team about 8 points per game, shot 40% from 3. That should be able to help out a little bit on that front. You're still searching for your main facilitator, but it feels like Dominic Bruton, the transfer from Alcorn State, starting to take a little bit more hold of that as he's been able to give the team 16 plus points in 4 of the team's last 5 games. So, while Fullerton has had a little bit of a rough start to the season as well, it does feel like things are starting to materialize for them, and Fullerton still plays really good defense, giving up fewer than 65 points in 4 out of their last 5 games. The one exception is when they went on the road against Boise State. And for Pacific right now, you're just searching for anything. I did set my total at a 134. I just don't think the Pacific holds up their end of the bargain on the total. So diving in on the under, I'm willing to lay up to 13.5 with Fullerton. 699, 700 on the betting board. Arizona and Alabama do battle from the Footprint Center out there in Arizona. And the Wildcats find themselves as a 6.5 point favorite. Totals between 172.5 and 173.5. Set my total at a 170.5. So I'm going to be diving in on the under. Both of these teams are playing super duper up tempo. Both of these teams have been some of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball, but I do think that you reach a little bit of a point of no return on these totals, and well, we all want to talk about how great this Arizona offense is. Let's talk about the defense as well. The reason why the Arizona defense doesn't get more love than what it does is because you'll see them give up like 75 plus points, and you think, oh, they gave up points, so they can't be very good. This team is number 9 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Check that. They're number 7 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So in terms of overall defensive efficiency, don't be fooled by the fact that they are going to give up 70 plus on the regular, because this team has been able to do a good job with that regard. That's just because they play super duper fast. You've got someone in Kylan Boswell who's been able to do a nice job in Caleb Love playing in tandem, a combined 9 assists per game. Love hit some ridiculous shots against Purdue to be able to keep the team snug in that one and try to give them a chance late. It is a Arizona team that I think is going to experience a little bit of regression with their 3-point shooting percentage, shooting about 39% from 3-point range. And what is going to be a big key in this game is going to be the way that these two teams are able to guard the 3-point arc. Alabama, after last season, they were doing a great job of holding teams down from 3-point range. They're now 200th in the country in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. In Arizona, they're 238. So both of these teams should have some open looks, but both of these teams I do think is due in for a little bit of regression as well. You've had Aaron Action Estrada for Alabama do a really nice job as a number 2 option to Mark Sears, who's been just one of the most incredible scorers in all of college basketball thus far this season for Alabama. Mr. Sears has been able to give you about 21 points per contest. And then you've got Aaron Action Estrada, who does a nice job of just really filling up the stat sheet. 14.5 points, 4 boards, 3 assists, a little bit over a steal per game. And Sears currently shooting 48% from 3. Alabama as a whole, they shoot 39% from the outside. And I also am a little bit of a believer in that with having this game being played at the Footprint Center, having a little bit of unfamiliar surroundings, that is going to be hurting both of these offenses. But what I think really hurts Alabama in this spot is that even though you've got the versatility of Grant Nelson, I do think that Arizona, having the best true low post player in this game in Umar Ballo, coupled with Keshad Johnson, give you 7 rebounds per game, that should allow them to be able to win the battle down low, because even though Alabama does play super duper up tempo, really, Nelson is the only guy on the roster that gives you north of 4.4 rebounds per game. They just don't have the same rebounding as they do a season ago, and that allow Arizona to be able to pull this game out there in the lovely city of Phoenix. I did set my line at 8.5. I do think that Alabama going to get a little bit exposed on defense. I don't feel as great about their defense as Arizona's, as Alabama 85 plus points surrendered in 4 of their last 5 games. So I'm going to be willing to lay the points with Arizona. I do think that Arizona going to be able to do just enough on defense to keep this total under. So my total at 170.5. As ridiculous as it is to say, that's good enough for an under, and I'm going to be one to lay the number with Arizona. 701, 702 on the betting board. This is out there in the Don Eskins Center out there in Texas. South Dakota State and Wyoming do battle in the Sun Bowl Classic, as Wyoming is a 5 to a 5.5 point underdog. Total on this game in between 144.5 and 145. And with South Dakota State, I did set them as a 5.5 point favorite. I'm going to be one to lay up to 5 with them. With Wyoming, they always do have some pretty demonstrative home and road splits. That is always something that you fear with this bunch. And then you take a look at the South Dakota State team. Certainly, this is not as up-tempo of an offense as we have seen in past years, but you got a guy in Zeke Mayo that's just able to stuff the stat sheet. He's going to be the best player in this game, in my opinion. 18.5 points, 6.5 boards, 3.5 assists per contest. And then Charlie Easley shoots north of 40% from three-point range. As a matter of fact, with Easley, you're able to throw in there Luke Capel, Kalen Gary. Between the three of them, they've been able to combine for about 32 points per contest, and they combine to shoot about 42.5% from three-point range. You don't necessarily have a ton of rebounding on this team, although each of your top 3 scorers and 4 of your top 5, they all do give you at least 5 rebounds per game. While you don't have that one like true post player that you've got all these guys doing a great job there. Meanwhile, for Wyoming, you do have Cam Manois, who's been able to give you about 7.5 boards per contest, but for Wyoming, they've just had such a tough time taking care of the ball. That was actually a bugaboo of South Dakota State's a season ago, and South Dakota State not going to do a lot of pickpocketing or anything like that, but Sam Griffin, a cool cut, your top 2 scorers combined for 6.8 turnovers per game, and for Griffin, he's shooting 49% from 3, and Wyoming as a whole shoots 42.9% from three-point range. That's just simply not sustainable. This is a South Dakota State team that is going to allow some three-point shooting opportunities. South Dakota State, 310th in the country in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage, but even if they were going against air, I don't think that they'd be able to maintain this. Wyoming has allowed opponents to shoot only about 31.5% from 3, so they've been able to do a pretty solid job with that regard. But it is a Wyoming team that has been dealing with quite a bit of injury. It is a team that's a little bit top-heavy as well. Brock Wenzel being able to give you 8.5 points per game has been solid, but I do think that Zeke Mayo going to be the top player in this game, and I do think that overall, you just have so much more depth with South Dakota State and a team that does a much better job of being able to take care of the ball. So this is a total that I did set at 141.5. Both of these teams well inside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game. And for Wyoming, they have given up 70 points for fear in 2 out of their last 3 games, while South Dakota State really found their offense 70 points for fear surrendered in 4 out of their last 5. So diving in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay it with South Dakota State. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we hit the extra game. 703, 704. Norfolk State is the road face-off against UTEP. And the Miners, they are pretty much in a home situation in a little bit of a Sun Bowl, I guess you call it invitational. They're between a 5.5 to a 6-point favorite, and your total on this game, finding it anywhere between a 137 and a 138.5. And with UTEP, I'm going to be willing to lay this number. With UTEP, I made them a favorite more in the neighborhood of 9 points. With Norfolk State, it is a bunch that is looking to get back to what they did that allowed them to make the NCAA tournament the last few seasons. And with Norfolk State, when they were making the NCAA tournament like 2019, 2021, those years, it was because of defense. And for Norfolk State, still a little bit of a work in progress, but in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they have creeped into the top 200. What really stands out to me about Norfolk State, they're giving up 20.5 points fewer per 100 possessions when they're on the road rather than when they are at home. Typically, you see the exact opposite with this team, but they've been able to do a really good job of hitting the road, playing well against some better competition, and I do like the transfer that comes in from UNC Wilmington that's really been able to elevate the offense. That'd be Jamari Thomas. He's been able to give you about 19 points, 4 assists per contest. It is a Norfolk State team that overall from three-point range, they've been shooting about 34% from the outside, but this is a UTEP team that they just create all sorts of havoc. Tay Hardy has really been your main guy, giving you about 15 points per game for a UTEP team that once again ranks in the bottom 75 in terms of three-point shooting percentage. They as collective are in the bottom 30 in terms of overall three-point shooting percentage, but for UTEP, they're currently generating a turnover on darn near 24% of possessions. That ranks number 4 in all of college basketball. You've got a few guys like Kevin Kalu who are able to give you about 6 rebounds per game. This is a Norfolk State team that they do have a little bit of a lack of size. With Norfolk State, you only have one guy that's able to give you north of 5 rebounds per game, and it's not like they necessarily have ideal size with that regard. You've been able to have 6'4", 6'5"-ish Delani Darden be able to give you about 5.5 rebounds per game, so that's going to be a little bit of an issue, especially especially with the UTEP having Zib Boom Boom Powell give you about 3.5 assists. He's been able to chip in there 11 points per contest. It is a UTEP team that does a nice job of just making things all over the place grimy, and they've got a lot of depth as well to go along with it. UTEP, when they want to, they're able to go about 10 deep, and for Norfolk State, they have been dealing with quite a few injuries. They were relying upon George Beal to be one of their top scorers. He's just now returning into the fold for the team after he was a 39% three-point shooter a season ago, and I do think that having to travel to the great state of Texas, that's going to take it out of this Norfolk State team just a little bit. So it is a circumstance where I did say UTEP as a 9-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number, and with this total, set mine as a 135 as UTEP, a relatively slow team that makes things very, very gross with regards to turnovers. So looking at the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay with UTEP. Now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-543, 306-544. Western Illinois hits the road face-off against Central Arkansas. And Central Arkansas, between a pick-em duel 1-point favorite, totals between 143.5 and 145. And with Central Arkansas, I set them as a favorite of 2.5 points. I'm going to be willing to take them as a pick-em / a very, very slight favorite. Just a Western Illinois team that in general has not really been able to find their footing in terms of backcourt. Front court, you've got a little bit of rebounding, and for Central Arkansas, they have been really up against it with their top scorer, Cameron Hunter, being out of the fold pretty much the entirety of the year thus far this season, but they've done a really nice job of being able to mix and match. A guy that has really stepped up and given this team what they've needed has been Tucker Anderson, a 6'9" freshman that is shooting nearly 40% from three-point range, 14.5 points with the CO per game, doesn't necessarily do a great job down low, and Drew Cisse, who's been able to give Western Illinois about 12 rebounds per game. That should be able to help them win that battle down low. You've also got Josiah West, who's been able to give you about 5 boards per game. James Dent Jr., with him being able to chip in there about 14.5 points per game. That's been relatively solid for a Western Illinois team that as a collective are one of the lesser shooting teams in all of college basketball. They're shooting 59.5% at the free throw line, 30.5% from three-point range, with 13.5 turnovers per game. And I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a nip and tuck game. And while Central Arkansas, not amazing with regards to their offensive execution, as this team has turned the ball over 13 times per game, at the very least, they shoot more like 74% at the free throw line. They're shooting about 34.5% from three-point range. I do think that free throw shooting percentage could come in very handy because you have a Western Illinois team that's also 253rd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. This is a Central Arkansas team that's never been great on defense. They never will be, 333rd in the country with that regard, but Elias Cato shooting 37.5% from the outside, chipping in there 5.5 boards, 11 points per game, and now being able to get more like 9 rebounds per game out of Obayigazi Itom. That is going to be enough, in my opinion, for Central Arkansas to be able to lead the way. They've been able to get a little bit more facilitation with the 5.5 assists per game out of Jonas Kasparu to be able to get the job done. So I did set Central Arkansas as a 2.5-point favorite at home in a game that is going to be tipping off very early, 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific, noon local time. So I did set my total more around a 146.5. I think that the grogginess is going to take hold a little bit, but I do think that you get enough possessions to be able to go over. So looking at the over and taking Central Arkansas as a pick'em / a 1-point favorite. 306-545, 306-546. NC Central is going to be playing us a Longwood. Longwood is a 6 to a 6.5-point favorite. Totals between 137 to 138, and with a Longwood, I did set them as a 7.5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. This was actually an opener of 4.5. Wholeheartedly agree with this line move, as this Longwood team is one of the best mid-major defenses in all of college basketball. Waylon Napper doesn't shoot it well from 3, but he gets everyone else involved, has been your main guy with about 14 to 15 points per game, doles out 4 assists per game, and is really a good defensive stopper for a Longwood team that's 11th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. As a matter of fact, when they hit the road, they're giving up 89.3 points per 100 possessions. That ranks number 5 in all of college basketball, and they go up against an NC Central team that is outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game. It's an NC Central team that last year they were really able to bomb it from three-point range, but I mean, they're missing someone like a Justin Wright who was really good from three-point range, so they've now had to rely upon a duo of Pooh King, and that's an actual name, along Jadarius Harris, to really lead the way. These two guys have been able to give you about 28 points per game. With Harris, he's been able to shoot 38% from three-point range, but he's been dealing with a few injuries recently, was able to return in the team's most recent game against a non-D1 foe, so he should be good to go in this one. But overall, NC Central now only shooting 30% from three-point range after they were a top 53-point shooting team a season ago, and then you had Brendan Medley-Bacon a season ago really dominate things down low. Now they're having to rely upon Emmanuel Izabuner. He's no stranger to Longwood. He played over at High Point a season ago out there in the same conference, but with NC Central, it's a lot of mixing and matching. They don't have as much of a true scoring guard as they did a season ago, though Fred Cleveland has been able to give you about 4.5 assists per contest. NC Central not coming up with the same amount of turnovers as they did a season ago as well. And Longwood, they're just sticking teams into the mud right now. For Longwood, other than their double overtime game against Delaware State, they have given up 72 points or fewer in every one of their games since opening night, where they gave up 73 points to St. Bonaventure. I really do think that they make this an eyesore of a game, and these two teams already met up once, and Longwood, they were able to get the job done 73-66 in a game in which NC Central, to be able to get to 66, they were having to shoot about 46.5% from the floor, only turned the ball over 9 times. I do think that those turnovers crank up a little bit more in this spot, so I did set my total at a 131.5, diving in on the under. I think that NC Central loses by a similar margin, willing to lay up to 7 with Longwood, 3-6-5-47, 3-6-5-48. Toledo is going to be playing us for Vermont. Vermont is a underdog of 4.5 points. Your total is anywhere between 148 to 148.5, and with Vermont, I did set them as an underdog of 4.5 points. This was an opener of 4, and now we're seeing some 5s pop up as well, and if we can get a 5, that'll be my buy point on Vermont. With Vermont, we all know that this is going to be a very slow and a very controlled team, and with Vermont, they do a nice job with regards to their offensive efficiency. You've got TJ Long, who he goes along with his shots, shooting 44.5% from three-point range. Matt Verrado, he's been able to give you about 11 points per game, stands right around 6'7", shoots in the high 30s from three-point range. The biggest issue that you have with him is that at right around like 6'8", needs to give you more than about 2.5 to 3 rebounds per game. But Vermont, they still do a solid job executing on offense. Top 130 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And Toledo last year, they were your number 1 team in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. That is down to 59th now. They're scoring north of 15 points more per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. And they still have a nice dynamic duo, and Raheem Moss along with Dante Maddox. These two guys have been able to combine for about 31.5 points per contest, with Maddox being your primary shooter at about 38.5% from 3. And all in all, it is a Toledo team that they still shoot about 39.5% from three-point range. With Vermont, though, they now have Shamir Bogues in the fold, who's been able to give you 3 assists, and he's done a nice job of being able to generate a few steals as well. He's really brought to this defense a little bit of an element that they haven't known before. Now for Vermont, this team is not going to force a whole heck of a lot of turnovers, even with having Shamir Bogues be able to give you those 2 steals per game. The team, in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, they are a bottom 10 team in all of college basketball, so you should be getting a lot of clean looks at the basket. The question becomes, can Vermont make those looks become a little bit more tough? Can they just get a hand in the face? And I do believe that answer is going to be yes. It is a Vermont team that currently overall is allowing opponents to shoot 34% from three-point range. That's a little bit low, but as we know, with the Toledo defense, they allow a lot of open looks as well. They are allowing opponents to shoot 37% from 3 and 40% from three-point range at home as well. Tyler Cochran, he does a nice job being able to pull in there about 5.5 rebounds per game, 2.3 assists per contest, but even though Vermont doesn't have a lot of rebounding, it's not like Toledo is doing a great job on the glass either. I do think that we should see a lot of open looks in this game, but with the way that Vermont plays, they're a bottom 20 team in the country, typically in terms of total possessions per game. They're playing quite slow once again. I do think that this is going to be a game where we just don't get enough possessions to be able to go over the total, and I do think that Vermont is going to do, once again, as they always do, a nice job of being able to hold on to the ball. Semi-total 144.5, diving in on the under, and north of 5, going to be willing to take the points with Vermont. 3-6-5-49, 3-6-5-50. St. Francis, Pennsylvania plays us a Robert Morris, and old Bobby Morris is a 4.5 point favorite. Your total's between 136 and 137. It's been a miserable year for Robert Morris, and yet here they are, finding themselves as a favorite because St. Francis of Pennsylvania sinks that bad, but I'm going to be willing to take the points with St. Francis of Pennsylvania. We've actually seen quite a nice heartbeat from this team. They go on the road, they knock off Lehigh. They go on the road, they knock off American. They hold within 7 points against Iona. They play a nip-and-tuck game against Mount St. Mary's. This team all of a sudden is finding a little bit of something, and for Robert Morris, I think that they've won 1 game against a Division I foe, and against D1 opponents, this team has really been held down as they have scored fewer than 70 points in now 4 out of their last 5 games against Division I teams. They're just relying a little bit too much on what you're able to get out of your former top 250 recruit in Justice Williams, who comes in from LSU, 2.5 assists, 13.5 points per game. But the team as a whole, they're only shooting about 30% from three-point range. Josh Corbin, who shot north of 40% from distance a season ago, he's currently giving you about 12.5 points per game, has been a little bit banged up and should be good to go in this one. Has given the team 16 plus points in 2 out of the last 3 games. And Marquise Hastings has nice versatility, comes in from Central Michigan, 15 points, 8.5 rebounds per game. But for St. Francis, even though they don't necessarily have that one takeover guy, Cam Gregory is the only guy that gives you north of 9 points per contest. He's at about 13 points per game. They're doing a good job of making things a little bit more difficult when the team is on offense. Their defense has been able to rise up currently in terms of offensive efficiency. This team is 354th in the country, though I will give them this. They are, St. Francis is scoring about 12.5 points more per 100 possessions when they are at home rather than on the road. And for St. Francis, I'm not saying that this is like some sort of a world beater defense or anything like that, but in their most recent last 3 games, they're giving up about 100 points per 100 possessions. They've been able to do a much better job on that front. You've got a team that, as a collective, is able to rebound. You're able to get about 7.5 points, 6 rebounds per game out of Eli Woolborn. You've been able to get right around about 4.5 boards, a few points per game out of Gesson Labiris. So these guys have done a nice job being able to step up. They're now generating about 7 steals per contest with St. Francis. The numbers aren't necessarily too great, but they've been able to really improve as the season has gone along, giving up 73 points or fewer in each of the last 5 games, going up against a Robert Morris team that has been unable to score. So I'm going to be willing to take the points with a team in St. Francis that's building momentum, set my line at a 3.5, and did set my total at 135.5. I think that it's going to be a struggle for either team to be able to get the ball in the basket. So diving in on the under and take the points with St. Francis. 306-551, 306-552 as West Virginia going to be playing us at Radford. Radford is a underdog of 6.5 points. Your total is between 137.5 and 138.5. Did set West Virginia as a 6-point favorite. So being able to get 6.5, I'm going to be willing to take the points. It's a West Virginia squad that has really gotten in their reinforcements as they are hoping to get Raekwon Battle back at some point. He was not out there in the fold for the team's last game against UMass, but they were able to get Noah Farrakhan out there. And with Noah Farrakhan, he had 15 points in that one. And you do have to like the fact that Kirk Risa, him being able to return, having 20 points, 7 assists, that's been big. The question is, can he be able to do a nice job of staying efficient? Because the biggest bugaboo that you always have with Kirk Risa is that sometimes he goes off and does a little bit too much. The routine play he tries to do some acrobatics with, so that's always a little bit of an issue. And then you do have a Cook who he had 6'10" a few seasons ago, shot north of 40% from 3-point range, a relatively good shot blocker, but for Kirk Risa, I think that it's a little bit of a detriment that he does have to go up against a Radford defense that they do a nice job of being able to pickpocket, as got someone named Brian Antoine, was a former top 50 recruit of Villanova. He's come in, he's been able to give the team a little bit north of a steal per contest, 9 points per game. You do have someone in Justin Archer, who I think is going to be able to hold his own down low. He's been able to do a solid job, being able to haul in there in the neighborhood about 8.5 or so rebounds per game. So that's something that you need to match up with, especially if you're Quinn Slazinski. He's trying to transition into a little bit more of a less dominant role now. Jesse Edwards, he's a double-double machine thus far this season, about 8.5 boards, 15 points per game. He should be able to win that battle against Archer, but the backcourt duo, Keenan Giles and Daquan Smith, being able to combine for about 28 points. Both of these guys give you 1.2 steals per game. I think that that's going to be a little bit of a hard guard as well, and this is a Radford team that they just do a really good job of executing, and now they've got a little bit more down low with DeAndre Pierce, who doesn't score much. He only gives you about 2.5 points, 4 boards per contest, but he gives you 2 blocks per game. Just a really nice eraser in general, and I do think that Radford is going to turn this into a little bit more of a defense-oriented game. We're seeing totals of 138.5 out there. I'm set my total at 138, so I'm going to be taking a look at the under. With Radford getting north of 6, going to be one to take a look at those points. 306-553, 306-554. East Carolina is going to be playing us to Delaware State. Delaware State is an underdog of between 10 and 10.5 points. Totals between 139.5 and 141.5. With East Carolina, I did set them as a 12.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay this number. It's a Delaware State team that has been able to step up a little bit more in terms of the backcourt, but at the same time, you're really lacking down low, and I think that that's where Brandon Johnson is going to be able to dominate this game. Brandon Johnson, a 6'8" do-it-all player for East Carolina that was dealing with illness towards the beginning part of the season, which has really warped these East Carolina defensive numbers, because while he was dealing with illness and while he was playing with it, this team was really getting cooked. That's a big reason why East Carolina is well outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Now they go up against the Delaware State team that's a relatively mid-tempo team that, to their credit, Delaware State about 167th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but with Johnson, 8+ rebounds in each of the team's last 4 games, a guy in 6 steals in those last 4 contests as well. He should be able to take it to a Delaware State team that right now you've been able to get right around about 6.5 rebounds, 18 points, 2.5 assists out of Martez Robinson, who has been a nice suit-all player, and Javion Muniz has been able to be a nice number 2 scorer, shooting 38% from 3, 14.5 points per contest. Outside of these guys, you don't necessarily have a ton, as you got Alston Andrews, Wesley Oba, who both have a little bit of size, both give you about 5.5 rebounds per game, but for Delaware State, they just turn the ball over way too much with about 16 turnovers per game, and I was alluding to it with East Carolina. Sure, the defensive numbers don't necessarily look too savory, but once Johnson has been able to find his sea legs, the team has been so much better, giving up 70 points or fewer in each of their last 4 games, going up against a Delaware State offense that in regulation against Division I teams, because they've played against a bunch of non-D1 teams that have really hiked up their numbers and made them look a whole heck of a lot better than what they are, and they've also played quite a few overtime games as well. So in regulation, they have scored 70 points or fewer in each of their last 3 games, so that's been a little bit of an issue. And for Delaware State, I believe that they have played now 3 overtime games, so that has really made their offense look a little bit more prolific than what it is when you've got someone like Bobby Pettiford giving you an assist-to-turnover ratio of 3, and RJ Felton has done a nice job giving you north of 5 rebounds per game. He's shipping in there 16 points per game. I do think that East Carolina going to take it to a Delaware State team that's been a little bit all over the place in terms of their overall scoring, and I did set my total at 142.5 as well, as this is a Delaware State team I think is going to struggle on the glass. That should allow East Carolina to be able to get those second and third chances, so I'm going to be looking at the over, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 12 with East Carolina. 306-555, 306-556. It is Grambling, and then the road face off against Southeast Louisiana. Southeast Louisiana does find themselves as a favorite of 6.5 to 7 points. Their totals between 135.5 and 136.5, and with Southeast Louisiana, I did set them as a favorite of 8.5 points, so I'm going to be willing to lay this number. Grambling last year was a top 15 team in all of college basketball. In terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, I've never seen this big of a fall off. 357th is Grambling this year in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Sure, Southeast Louisiana leaves something to be desired on defense. They're 337th with this regard, but man, it has really fallen downhill for this bunch, and you just take a look at what you're getting on Southeast Louisiana, and you've got some nice guys that have versatility. Roger McFarland has been a Swiss Army knife at right around 6'5". He and Nick Caldwell both give you about 13.5 points per contest. Combined between the two of them, you get about 11.6 rebounds per game. Caldwell is shooting 44% from 3, McFarland about 34% from the outside, and then Alec Woodyard has been able to shoot about 32% from 3, but chips in there, steal. You've got some good versatility with Carlos Paez being able to dish out the ball, though he's been a little bit in and out of the full transfer from Austin P has not really played since December 1st, so you have to look to some more of the ancillary pieces, and fortunately for them, Rocco Eastman has been able to give you 4 assists per game, and that's much more than what can be said for Grambling, a team that's shooting 25.5% from 3-point range with 14 turnovers per game. Jonathan Koo, he stands right around 6'9", 6'10", comes in from Stephen F. Austin, is the only guy that gives you north of 4.7 rebounds per game. You've been able to get some relatively good scoring out of Kendavius Dozier, who's been able to give you 14.5 points per game, but once again, he's only shooting about 25% from 3-point range. Good news for them, Antoine Burnett, he comes in after he was out of the fold, transitioning from the non-Division I level, began his career at Troy. In that last game against Drake, he was able to give the team 15 points per game, so perhaps that could be able to help this team out, but just feels like Trey Michael Morton has just never been able to ascend. I remember 2 years ago, he was able to give the team 10.5 points per game, took a fall off with his offense last year. This year, 2.5 turnovers to 3 assists per game, 8.5 points on 22% 3-point shooting. For Grambling, they're rough on offense, they're rough on defense. For Southeast Louisiana, you've got Broden Woodbury, who's able to do a relatively solid job down low, and that should allow Southeast Louisiana to dominate a Grambling team that just honestly isn't doing anything very well. I set my line at 8.5. I'm going to be willing to lay it with Southeast Louisiana. Did set my total at 142.5 with the way that Southeast Louisiana is a little bit more of a mid-tempo team, and I think they take it to one of the worst defenses in all of college basketball. So looking at the over and willing to lay it with Southeast Louisiana. 306-557, 306-558. It is Rice. We give our road to Lane Kiffin. Go Owls, and they are going to be playing us their Prairie View. Prairie View does find themselves as a 10-point underdog with your total between 144.5 and 145, and I'm going to make this one the DK Network write-up pick because I am taking a look at the over in this spot. I did set my total at 154. You've got a Prairie View team that currently ranks 18th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and with this Prairie View squad, it certainly has not been the world's most efficient defense on the face of planet Earth, right around 224th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Rice has actually gone downward a little bit in terms of their overall pace, as well as they're currently clocking in more around about 150th in terms of total possessions per game. But I do think that for Rice, having all the versatility that they have with Max Fiedler is going to allow them to be able to break the style of Prairie View. Prairie View, they're looking to generate turnovers, and they are very willing to commit fouls to do so. Prairie View, a top 20 team in all of college basketball in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They're also 12th in the country in terms of fouls committed per play as well. And you've got a guy, Max Fiedler, who stands 6'11", 9 9.5 points, 8.5 boards, 5 assists per contest for a Rice team that, to their credit, they've been able to do a nice job holding on to the ball. They're about 51st in the country in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis at home thus far this season, so that's a nice little building block. They go up against a Prairie View team that it's not been an amazing three-point shooting team by any stretch of the imagination, but they're actually much better than they have been in past years. They're shooting about 31.5% from three-point range. You've been able to get some valuable contributions from Charles Smith IV. He's been a little bit banged up, but he should be in the fold for this one after he was a little bit injured in that game against Iowa State. Returned against a non-D1 team, was able to put in there 14 points, and he's been the main man with about 14.5 points, 4 boards per contest. It is a Prairie View team that has been able to get a little bit more down low with about 7 rebounds per game out of Brian Miles as well. But I do think that Rice is going to be able to dominate with that aspect, and I do think that Rice is going to see a little bit of a tick up in terms of their three-point shooting, as right now you've got Travis Seavey shooting about 30% from three. He's a career 36% three-point shooting. Makai Mason last season shot 37.5% from the outside with 10 points per contest, shooting just 27.5% from three. And both of these defenses, they're very similar. Both of these teams outside the top 220 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Both of these teams outside the top 200 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage as well. So I do think that the tick upward is going to be there for both of these offenses. And when it comes to this Prairie View team, they are a team that they look to drive it inside. So they are going to be a team that is going to be able to force a lot of fouls. They're going to be looking to get a bunch of possessions in this game. It is a Prairie View team that against Division I competition also has been getting cooked. They've given up 74 plus points in 5 out of their last 7 games. And against C1 foes, Rice has given up 75 plus points in 7 out of their 10 games. So I do think that we're going to see a nice up-tempo game. I think that we're going to be seeing a bunch of scoring. My DK Network write-up pick is going to be on the over. I set my total at a 154, and with Rice, I did set them as a 10-point favorite. Right now, we saw an opener of 9. It's gone up to 10. If we go back to 9, going to be willing to lay that number with Rice to go along with the DK Network write-up of the over. 306, 559, 306, 560. Bethune-Cookman is on the road playing against Chicago State. Chicago State, a 6 to a 6.5 point favorite. Totals anywhere between 140.5 to 141.5. And with Bethune-Cookman, set them as a 5.5 point underdog. I'm going to be willing to take the points. You've got a Chicago State team that all of a sudden is getting a little bit of love because they've been able to cover some numbers. And this isn't the same old Chicago State team. This is a much better team than we've seen in past seasons. But you've got some talent on this Bethune-Cookman team. You've got a former top 150 recruit in Zion Harmon who's been able to do a nice job splashing in there. 13 plus points per contest. Can be a little bit inconsistent in terms of the shooting, can sometimes turn it over a little bit too much, but the talent is very undeniable with them. Going up against a Chicago State team that really has a big two. Wesley Carded along Jay Sean Corbett. These have been the guys that have been really the engine of this team, with Carded being the main scorer, 19 points, 2.5 assists, shooting in the mid-30s from three-point range, and then Corbett is able to give you about 7 rebounds per game. And what has really worked out for Chicago State, the fact that they generate turnovers. They're in the top 25 nationally in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. That's been a little bit of a, shall we say, deodorant to the fact that they do turn the ball over themselves about 14 times per contest. They're going to shoot about 29% from three-point range. But Noble Crawford, the transfer that comes in from Long Island, he's been able to do a nice job shooting about 45.5% from three-point range. That's been able to elevate the team a little bit. And then for Bethune-Cookman, the three-point shooting, it can be very hit or miss with this team, as they only shoot about 29% from distance as well. But getting Derek Carter Hollinger into the fold, he transfers in from Montana. He's been able to shoot about 40% from three 2 seasons ago at Montana at 6'7". He shot north of 40% from distance. That's been big. You've also been able to get about 15 points per contest out of Jacoby Heedy. Heedy has been able to do a solid job being able to chip in there about 35% three-point shooting. And this Bethune-Cookman team, they do a nice job of being able to pickpocket themselves. As got a guy, Damani McIntyre, that gives you 3.5 points and 3.3 steals per contest. You just don't see those numbers like ever. You've been able to get some good production out there in the backcourt, front court. Just a mess right now. You've only got one guy that's giving you north of 5 rebounds per game, Elijah Helsiwi, who's been in and out of the fold but should be good to go in this one. But I do think that with Bethune-Cookman being able to match the turnovers that Chicago State is able to generate, that does cause for a little bit more of an up and down game. And I do think that'll allow Bethune-Cookman to hold in this one. I set my line at a 5.5, so taking the points with Bethune-Cookman, set my total at 143.5, so also looking at the over. 306, 561, 306, 562. Iowa plays those to UMBC. UMBC, a 26.5 to a 27-point underdog with the total between 178 and I'm seeing as high as a 179.5 out there. I set my total at a 176. This UMBC defense is a train wreck. And I mean, boy, are they a train wreck. They are well outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, all while being one of the most up-tempo teams in all of college basketball. So that has caused for some very, very harebrained and insane games. As for UMBC, they're giving up 110.3 points per 100 possessions on the road. But this is also an Iowa team that they're a significantly better team at home rather than on the road with regards to their defense. And as a matter of fact, they're giving up right around about 24.9 points fewer per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. So I think that this is overreactionary. I don't think it's too far off. I set my total at a 176, so not like I think we're going to get some sort of a slog here or anything like that, but I'm going to be looking at the under with Iowa. Could also only set them as 24-point favorite. I do like the game of Ben Krikke, 16.5 points, chips in their 5+ rebounds per game, and Peyton Sanford has all sorts of versatility, 13 points, 6 half boards, and obviously this is an Iowa team that is going to be able to put up numbers in terms of their scoring 26 straight home games with at least 75 points. That is not a streak that's going to be ending in this one, but for Iowa, this is a team that could be a little bit hit or miss for three. Now, they shoot like 40% from three at home, closer to 31% on the road, but I just don't know if you're going to be able to get to like 100 like you're probably going to need to be able to both cover this spread and get the total over. Meanwhile, for UMBC, Deion Brown has been a nice piece for the team. 16.5 points, 5.5 boards. You don't have great rebounding with this UMBC team as you only have two separate guys. They're able to give you north of 4.5 rebounds per game. Kadarius Smith is the other one, and to the credit of Smith, had a little bit of tough time hitting the boards to begin the season. 4+ boards in each of the last 5 games and 5 blocks in the last 3 games. So we have seen UMBC play a little bit better down low recently. They're coming off of giving up 66 points against St. Peter's. That was a outlier of a performance, and that speaks to how bad we have been seeing St. Peter's perform on offense as well. But I do think that you're going to be able to get just enough in the backcourt to be able to hold in this game, because you've also got a 10.5 point per game scorer in Marcus Banks that does a relatively solid job with that aspect. It is an Iowa team that, when you take a look at what they've been able to do at home, and the home defensive numbers, halfway decent. Last game, they gave up 52 points to Florida A&M. Once again, I think that says a little bit more about Florida A&M, but I do think that this has gone a little bit out of whack. This is just not the same Iowa teams as when they had the Murray brothers a few seasons ago. So a circumstance where I'm going to be willing to take the points with UMBC, set them as a 24-point underdog, and in terms of the total, set mine at a 176. So as ridiculous as it sounds, that's going to be an under, and I'm going to be willing to take the points. 306-563, 306-564. Gonzaga is going to be playing us to Jackson State. Jackson State, a 26.5 point underdog. Total on this game between 151 and 151.5 with Gonzaga. Set them as a 22.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. It does feel like Jackson State has gotten a little bit too much love after they got that win against Missouri. It is a Jackson State team that they've got Ken Evans, who's been a really good scorer for them. He's done a nice job logging in there about 19 points per contest. The problem with Jackson State is they really don't have anything outside of Evans. Nobody else on the roster gives you north of 12 points per game, though I will say you certainly do have Jordan O'Neal surging for the team. He's been able to give you about 12 points per game thus far this season, but in the last 2 games, a combined 43 points, so he's been able to come on strong. You've been able to get a little bit down low with Zeke Cook, giving you about 6.5 rebounds per game, but for Gonzaga, they should be able to have Anton Watson along with Graham Ike completely overwhelm them. These two guys, between the two of them, about 15 rebounds, 28 points per contest, and for Gonzaga, you don't have that one main man like you've had in past seasons that is able to just go out there and completely dominate a game or anything like that. But you do have a lot of guys that they do a really good job in concert. They do a nice job of being relatively unselfish with the ball. Biggest thing is you do need to have Ryan Nembhard cut down on the 2.8 turnovers per game. And at some point, he needs to shoot better than 19% from 3-point range, because right now for Gonzaga, out of your top 6 scorers, he's the only one that's shooting below 34.7% from 3. And as a matter of fact, all but 2 of them shoot at least 36.5% from 3-point range. You've been able to have someone like a Ben Gregg step up with about 7 points per game. Braden Huff has been able to give you 10.5 points per game. So you've got a lot of different options for this Gonzaga team, and it is a Jackson State team that they do look to play a little bit more up-tempo. I do think that Gonzaga should be able to find their footing once again on offense, with Jackson State 291st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And to the credit of Gonzaga, even though the offense is not what it has been in past years, this is actually still a relatively okay defense. They're now up to 44th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They're giving up about 8.6 points fewer per 100 possessions this year than they did a season ago. So I do think that it's going to be a little bit difficult for Jackson State to be able to get points up on the board, which is why I did set my total at 150.5. It does feel like this is just a little bit of a different Gonzaga team in general, so it is a circumstance where I'm going to be willing to take a look at this total under, and with Gonzaga willing to lay up to 22 with them. 306.565, 306.566. It is Utah, and they play us at Bellarmine. Bellarmine finds themselves as a 19.5 to a 20-point underdog. Your total on this game, it is 144, and with Bellarmine, I did set them as a 20-point underdog at 19.5. I am going to be willing to lay this number with Utah. Utah has been able to do a nice job with their overall versatility, as you've got Brandon Carlson, who's been able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range at 7 feet tall. He gives you north of a block and a half per contest, chips in there 6+ rebounds per game, and Utah as a collective, they just do a nice job of being able to rebound by committee. Utah was actually a top 35 team in the country last year in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. We have seen a little bit of a fall off this year. They're more around 119th in the country, but they are giving up 16.3 points fewer per 100 possessions when they are at home rather than when they are on the road. And you got a Bellarmine team that they always are one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball. They do a nice job of not turning the ball over. They don't necessarily have one primary scorer, and they always give it up on defense. They're 250th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and that's actually their most efficient defense that we have seen really to date ever since Bellarmine has joined the Division I ranks. So that's very interesting to take a look at, to say the least. It is a Bellarmine team that's certainly going to be up against it with someone like a Raleigh Worcester, who's been able to do a nice job doling it out with about 5.5 assists per game, has been quite efficient for a Utah team that in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, they were just all over the place last season, and we did see things go off the rails in conference play last year, but right now they're a top 40 team in terms of their overall offensive efficiency, with Utah as a whole shooting about 37.7% for three-point range. Gabe Madsen, 14.5 points, shoots north of 40% from three. Meanwhile, Bash Weiland and his 14.5 points per game, that is really the top mark for this Bellarmine team, as you do have Ben Johnson, who's been able to give you about 12.5 points per game, but he's been a little bit in and out of the fold. Should be good to go in this one after he was dealing with the injury more towards the early part of the season. But for Bellarmine, even though they are very efficient, shooting about 81% of the free throw line, 32.5% from three, they really just don't do a great job being able to hit the glass. You've got one guy giving you north of 5.5 rebounds per game in Langdon Hannon, with just all the size that Utah is able to bring you, with Utah doing one of the best jobs on the glass in all of college basketball, with each of their top four scorers giving you at least 4.4 rebounds per game, including Kiba Kita, who was dealing with a little bit of an injury to begin the season, but should be good to go in this one. I think that Utah dominates on the glass in a game that's going to be slow and controlled. Set my line at 20, so at 19.5 or less, want to lay it with Utah, and did set my total at 138. I do think that Utah going to get back to those defensive roots that were so good last season, so diving in on the under and willing to lay it with Utah, and we wrap things up with 306.567, 306.568. UC Santa Barbara plays us Howard. Howard finds themselves as 8 to 9 point underdogs, and your total on this game is 150.5 to 152.5. Did set my total at 152, mostly seeing a consensus about 151. Willing to take that over, plus I'd rather have the 151 over rather than the 152.5 under, but with UC Santa Barbara, did set them as a 10-point favorite. Going to be willing to lay the number. I feel like numbers have been a little bit too low on UC Santa Barbara, with them now having A.J. Mitchell back in the fold. A.J. Mitchell has been just such an explosive player over his college basketball career, and ever since he has been back in the fold for UC Santa Barbara, this has been a much more trustworthy team. With Mitchell, he logs 21.5 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, shooting 44% from three-point range. Don't know if that three-point shooting percentage is necessarily sustainable, but I mean, even with the defensive side of things for UC Santa Barbara, they were getting cooked without him to begin the season, as they had given up 70-plus points in each of their first 4 games of the season. For UC Santa Barbara, they still have been a little bit hit or miss in terms of their defense, but now they've been able to hold 3 out of their last 5 opponents to less than 70 points. So that has been a nice improvement. You've also got for this UC Santa Barbara team a former top 50 recruit in Yuan Traore, who comes in from Auburn. He's able to give you 14.5 points, does a solid job down low as an offensive piece. Would like to see a little bit more rebounding, but that's why you've got Ariel Bland giving you 8.5 rebounds per game. And I do think that they match up well with a Howard team that has been one of the most rambunctious and one of the most up-tempo in all of college basketball, as Seth Towns has been really showing off why he was the Ivy League Player of the Year a few seasons ago. By a few seasons ago, I mean the 2017-18 season. Yeah, he's the Van Wilder of college basketball. 15.5 points, shooting 45.5% from 3 as a 6'9", little bit of a combo player. Biggest thing for Howard, though, they need to take better care of the ball. 16.8 turnovers per game. Bryce Harris is able to give you about 14.5 points per game. It's a Howard team that as a whole, they shoot 36.7% from three-point range, and Howard as an up-tempo team, they really do give it up. They're a team that ranks right around 278th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Santa Barbara still not where they have been defensively over the last few seasons, but once again, with Mitchell being out of the fold for the beginning part of the season, I feel like those numbers have been a little bit warped, and I do think that with Santa Barbara being more of a slow and controlled team, they are going to be able to slow down the tempo a little bit, but with the way that Howard plays, they're one of the few teams in all of college basketball that can really speed you up, as it's a Howard team that's now given up at least 78 points in 4 of their last 5 games. So I did set my total at 152, so 150.5, 151, looking at the over, and willing to lay up to 9.5 with UC Santa Barbara, and that will wrap things up for the Wednesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we help further those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at JNN_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated from there. You're able to fire whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks to Nick Lorensen of Mid-Major Madness for joining me in the last segment. Coming at you guys every single day throughout the college basketball season. And that means I'm coming at you and get them out. Thank you so much for tuning in.